Chapter 42:20. These captives were very loyal to Commander Acheron and the god of the underworld. They were known as Death Warriors. In their minds, as long as they could spread the news that Kenshin had come to Reincarnation Island and let Commander Acheron and the Blood Prison Marshal be on guard, their deaths would be worth it. Using their lives in exchange for this important news and delivering it to Commander Acheron was absolutely worth it. Moreover, Kenshin and Patriarch Song he had already left. There was no one guarding the prison, nor was there anyone watching over it. The 2,000 captives were all free. These captives still harbored some hope that if they were not discovered by Kenshin and Patriarch Song he, they would not be executed. However, something unbelievable and horrifying happened. Right when the 5 captives were inputting messages into the communication jade chip, a deafening clap of thunder suddenly burst out in the originally quiet and dim prison. Kaboom! In that instant, 5 pillars of lightning appeared out of thin air in the prison. Like sharp swords that could split heaven and earth, they descended from the sky and struck the 5 captives. Each pillar of lightning was as thick as a bowl and over 100 feet long. They were completely purple and black, containing a terrifying heavenly might. In a quarter of an instant, the 5 captives were struck by the pillars of lightning before they could react. Bang! Bang bang! In the deafening sound, the 5 captives were struck into charcoal on the spot, turning into a pile of black ash that splashed everywhere. The ground where they stood was also struck by the lightning. It was as dark as a well, with black smoke rising in spirals. The captives around them, who were very close to the pillars of lightning, were unharmed. From this, one could see how fast and accurate the pillars of lightning were. The muffled sound was still echoing in the prison. More than 2,000 captives were dumbfounded. They were all dumbfounded, and their eyes were wide open and their mouths were aghast. A moment later, someone finally reacted and let out a series of exclamations. It's heavenly punishment. The legend is true. The oath we made to the heavenly Tao is really being watched by the heavenly Tao. It's too terrifying. Those 5 brothers only wanted to send a message to the Grand Commander, but they were struck into ashes before they could even send a message. No wonder those heavenly anomalies appeared after we recited the oath of surrender. It turns out that we are really being monitored and restricted by the heavenly Tao. Those 5 brothers were basically all high divine lords, but they couldn't react at all and were instantly killed by the heavenly lightning. The might of heavenly punishment is so terrifying. It's over. After we recited the oath of surrender, we were completely tied up by the Kenshin. We didn't even dare to think of resisting. Yes. Those 5 brothers had just taken out their jade slips, but before they could send out a message, they were struck to death by heavenly lightning. Alas! No wonder Kenshin was so confident. He turned around and left after we swore the oath of surrender. He wasn't worried about us escaping at all. The prison became restless and chaotic. More than 2,000 people exclaimed in surprise and started to discuss in whispers. Their faces were extremely unsightly. The 5 captives were reduced to ashes by the heavenly lightning, which also proved that the heavenly oath was effective. Just as everyone had guessed, after the oath was established, the heavenly Tao had been monitoring everyone at all times. The moment anyone had any thoughts of betrayal and took action, they would immediately be punished by heavenly punishment. There was absolutely no luck. As such, more than 2,000 captives were scared witless. Many of them didn't even dare to think of resisting. After a full 15 minutes, the crowd gradually quietened down. More than 2,000 captives also became well-behaved. They each found a place to sit down and began to circulate their energy to regulate their breathing and heal their injuries. Since fate had already decided that they couldn't betray Kenshin, then under the circumstances where they didn't want to die, they could only silently endure and do as they were told. Just as Kenshin had said, they could still be of use in the future. They could even atone for their crimes by meritorious service and have a chance to regain their freedom. The 3 pine crane elders who were hiding in the dark to observe the situation were still somewhat fearful at first. When they saw the 5 captives taking out their jade slips and preparing to send a message, they almost couldn't help but jump out to stop them. But before they were ready, those 5 captives were struck to death by the heavenly lightning. They were also dumbfounded, their hearts filled with shock and awe. When the image of Kenshin's back appeared in their minds again, it became even taller, more majestic, and more sacred. After waiting for about 15 minutes, they saw that more than 2,000 captives had quietened down and were obediently circulating their energy to heal their injuries. Only then did they leave quietly. After leaving the prison, the 3 elders went to report the situation to their patriarch with excitement. Half an hour later, the 3 elders entered Patriarch Pine Crane's study and fought to be the first to describe what had happened, vividly describing what had happened. When Patriarch Pine Crane heard that the 5 captives took out their jade slips to send a message to Commander Mingi, he was also full of worry and his heart was in his throat. When he heard that the 5 captives were struck to ashes by the heavenly lightning before they could send a message, he was also full of shock and disbelief. While he was shocked and excited, he also secretly rejoiced and felt a lingering fear. After all, he was also someone who had taken the oath of surrender and was constantly under the surveillance of the heavenly law. Fortunately, he didn't resist Kenshin or have any thoughts of harming Kenshin, let alone take action. Otherwise, he would have been struck to ashes by the heavenly lightning without any chance of survival. After the 3 elders finished, he let out a long breath and couldn't help but sigh. Kenshin is really a god, I can't see through him. Even the heavenly law is for him, helping him to monitor the captives and subjects. It's incredible. Even the 5 god emperors can't do such a thing. Could it be that, as Kenshin said, the 5 god emperors are treacherous, evil, and cruel, and he is the embodiment of justice, the messenger of the heavenly law? The 3 elders looked at each other with a somewhat complicated expression. Their eyes were full of awe, but they didn't speak. Although Patriarch Pine Crane's sigh and speculation sounded ridiculous, the 3 elders didn't laugh at it. However, the 3 elders did not find it laughable. Instead, they found it very believable. In a flash, 3 days passed. The Reincarnation Island was still in turmoil. Hundreds of millions of people were still talking about the war between the 5 ancient clans and Commander Mingi. 500 assassins of the Hidden Death Group had already stepped into the border of the Cypress Pine region ahead of the army. They were the advance team and had to enter the Cypress Pine region first to fully investigate the Pine Crane clan's background. The 18,000 troops led by the Blood Prison Marshal were still riding on 9 divine warships toward the Cypress Pine region at a moderate speed. They could also enter the Cypress Pine region in 12 hours at the latest. On the other side, ancient Pine Grotto Heaven also welcomed a few mysterious guests. Even though these god kings had not come together, and had arrived one after another, they had all arrived. Moreover, each of them had disguised themselves to hide their true identity and appearance. However, their arrival had long been expected by Ji Tianqing and Patriarch Pine Crane. Therefore, their identities were not mysterious. Chapter 42-21. The guards guarding the entrance to ancient Pine Grotto Heaven promptly reported the situation to Patriarch Pine Crane and asked for instructions on how to deal with the situation. Patriarch Pine Crane guessed that the person they were waiting for had arrived when he heard the description of the guards. He immediately ordered them to be let in. As for the experts who had arrived at ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, they were led by the Pine Crane guards to the meeting hall after entering the Grotto Heaven. The attitude of the Pine Crane clan was neither warm nor indifferent. It was neither warm nor distant. In short, they let the experts wait in the meeting hall first. After serving them tea and fruits, they waited patiently. The experts who had arrived first saw the arrogant attitude of the Pine Crane clan and felt uncomfortable, but they did not dare to act out. After all, their visit to ancient Pine Grotto Heaven was of great significance. Their mission was sacred and difficult. Before they met that world-renowned expert, they could tolerate any form of contempt and neglect. As time passed quietly, the tea in front of the experts was refilled after they drank it. When it was cold, they reheated it again. After a full 6 hours, the 8 experts of the 4 forces had all arrived. They sat on the large chairs on the left and right sides. They all looked at each other with tacit understanding. Although everyone had disguised themselves and covered their faces, they were too familiar with each other. They could recognize each other even with their eyes closed. Finally, someone could not help but speak. I was the first to arrive. I waited for a full 6 hours. Not only did Song Hetao not show up, but even the elders of the Pine Crane clan could not be seen. The Pine Crane clan is so arrogant now. How dare they neglect us? Humph! After saying that, the patriarch snorted coldly. The other 2 patriarchs had the same idea, but their reactions were not as intense. They shook their heads with smiles. Brother Qianlong, you're wrong. We all know that the old man Song Hetao is rather stubborn. He's a stubborn man. With his personality, he might not do such an arrogant act to humiliate us. That's right. Maybe Song Hetao just wants to wait for us to arrive before meeting and discussing with everyone. This is more appropriate. If someone came first and someone else came later, and Song Hetao met them separately for a secret talk, wouldn't we be at odds with each other and suspect each other? Even though the 2 clan leaders were somewhat dissatisfied with the Pine Crane race's cold response, they were still quite dissatisfied with the Pine Crane race. However, they were smarter and more tactful, so they would definitely not reveal the dissatisfaction in their hearts. This was because they were on guard against Patriarch Song He observing them from the shadows. What was even more frightening was that if Kenshin was really in the ancient pine grotto, then he would already be watching them from the shadows. Rashly placing the Pine Crane tribe chief would inevitably provoke Kenshin's displeasure. Anyway, the Kenshin had already subdued the Pine Crane tribe. Song Hetao was more fortunate as he was the first to submit to the Kenshin, so he would definitely be highly regarded. They could only be envious and jealous, but there was nothing they could do. All he could do was to be more meticulous and try his best to please Kenshin. On the surface, the 4 clans seemed to be harmonious, but they all had their own thoughts and plans. None of the leaders of the ancient clans were easy to deal with. After arguing for a while, the 3 patriarchs calmed their anger and waited patiently. Meanwhile, Patriarch Song He had already gone to Ji Tianqing's residence to ask for instructions in person. In the study, Patriarch Song He bowed slightly and respectfully said, reporting to Sir Kenshin, the patriarchs of the 4 clans have each brought an elder into the conference hall. Look, they're all here. Shouldn't we? At this point, Patriarch Song He stopped talking and quietly looked at Ji Tianqing, waiting for him to make a decision. Ji Tianqing was reclining on an armchair, flipping through an ancient scroll. Hearing this, he put down the simple and yellow scroll, rubbed his chin, and said with an indifferent expression, "Some of them have been waiting for 6 hours, so they must have some resentment in their hearts. Since that's the case, let's let them drink tea for another 6 hours to cool down." Huh? Patriarch Song He was stunned and looked at Ji Tianqing with a puzzled expression, saying, "Sir Kenshin, this isn't very good, is it? Besides, they know you're here. So what if they wait for 6 hours? They definitely won't dare to have any resentment towards you." Ji Tianqing glanced at him and asked with a smile, "They still aren't sure whether I'm in ancient pine paradise or not, so how could they have any resentment towards me? You, on the other hand, can apologize to them when you see them later. Otherwise, they will definitely slander you behind your back." Patriarch Song He was stunned for a moment, but he immediately understood what he meant and couldn't help but smile bitterly. "Thank you for your reminder, Sir Kenshin. This old man didn't intend to neglect or make things difficult for them. I just wanted to wait for them to arrive and then meet them to discuss things together. Only then would it be fair. This old man didn't think too much and didn't think that it would have such an effect. Indeed, With Kenshin overseeing ancient Pine Paradise, how could Patriarch Song He dare to act unscrupulously and make things difficult for and humiliate the patriarchs of the four ancient clans? He would only be more cautious when handling matters and considering problems, for fear of making a mistake that would affect Kenshin's plan. However, he had neglected the psychological reactions of the four patriarchs and only understood the key point after Kenshin's reminder. However, Kenshin had just said that the four patriarchs should wait for 6 hours. Wasn't this deliberately making things difficult and neglecting them? Patriarch Song He couldn't refute it, let alone disobey the order. He still had to take the blame for Kenshin and bear the resentment of the four clans. The four clans couldn't afford to offend Kenshin, but couldn't they afford to offend him? Thus, he could only smile bitterly. Ji Tianqing no longer paid attention to him and continued to read the ancient scroll. Patriarch Song He felt awkward staying in the study and couldn't find anything to do. Thus, he bid farewell to Ji Tianqing and left the study. After walking out of Ji Tianqing's residence, Patriarch Song He recalled Ji Tianqing's reminder and suddenly had a flash of inspiration. That's right, Sir Kenshin told them to wait for 6 hours before showing up, but he didn't say that I can't go see them. I can go and explain to those old fellows first so that they won't blame me. When the time comes for them to form an alliance, they'll join forces to make things difficult for me. Based on the current situation, Patriarch Song He felt that Kenshin was the first to subdue him and would definitely value him the most. After Kenshin subdued the other four clans, the rebel alliance would be officially established. At that time, Patriarch Song He would definitely be the leader of the 5 clans. In other words, Kenshin would have to go to other continents after conquering Reincarnation Island. In that case, Reincarnation Island would most likely be handed over to him to manage. However, if the other 4 clans joined forces to trap him and deliberately resist him, then it would be hard to say. For Kenshin, stability and efficiency were the most important. For the sake of the overall situation, it was natural to sacrifice him, Patriarch Song He. Thinking of this, Patriarch Song He shuddered and hurried to the conference hall. Chapter 42-22. Master Kenshin was right. As soon as he entered the meeting hall, Patriarch Song He felt that the atmosphere was a bit strange. The patriarchs and elders of the 4 clans were all in disguise. On the surface, they seemed to be drinking tea, resting with their eyes closed, and waiting patiently. But in fact, everyone's eyes were filled with impatience and dissatisfaction. Especially the patriarch of the Hidden Dragon clan, who was the most straightforward and hot-tempered guy. He almost had a black face. Seeing this scene, Patriarch Song He stepped into the hall and laughed heartily. Ha 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 ha, nobody knew when it started, but there was an unwritten rule on the Reincarnation Island. When the various forces and experts met, they had to laugh and greet each other. The longer they laughed, the less hostile they were, and the more they asked the other party to rest assured. Therefore, Patriarch Song He laughed for more than 10 breaths without taking a breath. As he laughed, he glanced at the powerhouses with a smile on his face and nodded in greeting to the 4 clan leaders. This scene looked a bit strange. When the experts of the 4 clans saw that Patriarch Song He had finally appeared, their impatience and resentment finally dissipated. They all stood up and focused their gazes on Patriarch Song He. All of them revealed friendly smiles. Only the patriarch of the Hidden Dragon clan frowned and asked in a deep voice, Song Hetao, what the hell are you doing? Are you deliberately mystifying things? Patriarch Song He was not angry in the face of his question, and he still maintained his smile. He walked to the front of the throne, then turned to look at the crowd and explained, Patriarchs, this old man knows that you've been waiting here for 4 to 6 hours, and you're a bit anxious. After all, you all want to see that lord as soon as possible, and this old man can understand your feelings. But please understand that this old man must wait for all of you to arrive before we can talk openly. Otherwise, those who arrive later will suspect that this old man is colluding with those who arrive first. Don't you think so? When the patriarch of the Hidden Dragon clan complained before, Patriarch Han Xian also said the same thing, so everyone understood this reason, and the patriarch of the Hidden Dragon clan could not make trouble again. However, he was still indignant and said in a deep voice, "Now that everyone is here, shouldn't we get down to business?" Patriarch Song He nodded and said, "Since the misunderstanding has been resolved, this old man hopes that everyone can discuss this matter peacefully. After all, we have the same situation and goal. In the eyes of the millions of people on the Samsara island, we are allies. Therefore, this old man would like to remind all of you." At this point, he deliberately paused to observe the reactions of the 4 patriarchs. The 4 clan leaders didn't object to his words. They only urged him, seeming a little impatient and expectant. "That's enough, Patriarch Song He. Stop keeping us in suspense. What do you want to remind me of? Just say it." Patriarch Song He stroked his beard and said in a neither fast nor slow manner, "The Lord that everyone wants to see is currently in the ancient pine grotto. Everyone will be able to see him soon. But you should also understand how noble that Lord's status is and how powerful his methods are. If you have any unrealistic ideas, you should dispel them as soon as possible. In addition, everyone should be more respectful to that Lord. Most importantly, that Lord thinks highly of our efficiency and ability. Therefore, it's best that we don't waste time arguing over such trivial matters. If we really want to form an alliance and work together, it's better for us to work together and do our best." These were Patriarch Song He's heartfelt words. Of course, he hoped that the 4 clans could behave themselves and not cause any trouble. The 4 clan leaders might not agree with these words, nor would they pay too much attention to Patriarch Song He. However, in front of Patriarch Song He, especially before they saw Kenshin himself, they certainly wouldn't show any dissatisfaction. The 4 clan leaders nodded repeatedly to show their agreement and echoed Patriarch Song He's words. After a series of hypocritical pleasantries, the Hidden Dragon clan leader couldn't wait to ask, "Patriarch Song He, since we've been frank and honest, there's no awkwardness or misunderstanding. Then, can you ask that Lord to come out so that we can meet him face to face?" Patriarch Song He looked at him with a smile and said, "I'm afraid you've forgotten that you haven't recovered your original faces yet. How can you be frank and honest?" The Hidden Dragon clan leader was embarrassed and quickly removed his disguise. The other 3 clan leaders also smiled embarrassedly and quickly removed their divine abilities and secret techniques to restore their original faces. After the 4 clan leaders removed their disguises, the 4 elders standing behind them also restored their original faces. Therefore, the atmosphere in the main hall was much more relaxed. The elders looked at each other and smiled, hiding the awkwardness in their hearts. In contrast, the Hidden Dragon clan leader, who was younger, was a burly middle-aged man with a full beard. He was a typical boorish man. He asked again, "Song He Tao, is it all right now? Go and ask that Lord to come out." Patriarch Song He still looked at him with a smile and explained, "You must be joking, Hidden Dragon clan leader. I'm only that Lord's subordinate and servant. How would I dare to make a decision on my own? Moreover, that Lord is dealing with some matters and will need 4 to 6 hours to complete them. Everyone has waited for a few months, so we're not in a hurry. Don't be impatient and wait patiently for a while." The 4 clan leaders were somewhat disappointed by this explanation. They did not believe Patriarch Song He's words. However, they were not the host and had never seen that Lord in person. They could not invite him themselves, could they? Even if they guessed that Patriarch Song He was manipulating them, they could only swallow their anger and silently sit down to drink tea. The main hall was silent again. In order to show his sincerity, Patriarch Song He also sat down to drink tea and chat with everyone. However, the clan leaders were not in a good mood and did not bother to respond. Therefore, after a few awkward words, Patriarch Song He simply shut his mouth and did not speak. As time passed, the clan leaders became more and more anxious. They were more and more terrified of Patriarch Song He's cunning old fox and Kenshin's shrewdness. They also understood that this was not Patriarch Song He's idea. Kenshin must have deliberately left them hanging to dampen their spirits. However, they could only pretend to be confused. How would they dare to express their dissatisfaction with Kenshin? 2 hours passed, and the 4 clan leaders were full of irritation and resentment. 4 hours later, the resentment of the 4 clan leaders gradually subsided. After calming down, they began to carefully ponder Kenshin's intentions. Before coming to ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, they had already decided on how to negotiate with Kenshin, what conditions and benefits to reach. But now, after 3 hours of calming down, their spirits had been dampened again and again, and their willpower was somewhat shaken. Recalling Patriarch Song He's reminder, they gradually understood the reality. They had prayed for Kenshin's protection and wanted to follow Kenshin to overthrow the god of the underworld's rule and become the ruler of Reincarnation Island. Therefore, they did not seem to be qualified to negotiate with Kenshin. Chapter 42-23. When the 4 patriarchs calmed down and began to reflect, Ji Tianqing had achieved his goal. The reason why he deliberately left the 4 patriarchs in the main hall and delayed the meeting for 6 hours was to avoid unnecessary disputes and trouble. It was obvious that the 4 patriarchs would not be like Patriarch Song He, who bowed to him as soon as they met and pledged their loyalty without asking about the conditions and benefits. However, Ji Tianqing could not promise the 4 patriarchs anything, and he was too lazy to waste his breath. Therefore, he came up with this plan. As it turned out, this method was quite useful. 6 hours had passed, and the tea in front of the 4 patriarchs was already cold. However, they were no longer as impatient as before, and their emotions were much calmer. The Hidden Dragon Patriarch, who was the most straightforward and hot-tempered one, no longer wanted to be the first one to stand out and chose to remain silent. Another white-haired old man, the Fang Patriarch, stroked his beard and asked, Patriarch Song He, 6 hours have passed, what do you think? Patriarch Song He also knew that the time had come to invite Kenshin to appear. Therefore, he cupped his fists at the patriarchs and said, please wait for a moment, this old man will go and meet that lord now. After that, he quickly left the main hall and rushed to Ji Tianqing's residence. After arriving at the residence, he entered the study and saw Ji Tianqing was still flipping through the ancient scroll. He bowed and asked, Lord Kenshin, 6 hours have passed. Ji Tianqing closed the scroll and turned to look at him. He asked, how are the 4 patriarchs now? Are their emotions still stable? Patriarch Song He replied with a smile, just as you said, they've waited for 6 hours, and all their anger and resentment have disappeared. They've all calmed down and are much calmer now. Alright, let's go then. Ji Tianqing smiled, put down the ancient scroll in his hand, and got up to leave the study. In order to keep it a secret, he remained invisible during the process of going to the main hall. He only revealed himself when he entered the main hall. He took the lead and stepped into the main hall, followed by Patriarch Song He. Immediately, the gazes of the 4 patriarchs who were waiting eagerly in the hall all gathered on him. The 4 leaders all stood up subconsciously, looking at Ji Tianqing with curiosity and reverence. As for Patriarch Song He, who was standing behind Ji Tianqing, they completely ignored him. Ji Tianqing calmly walked through the hall and sat down on the throne. Patriarch Song He followed him and stood below the throne as if they were his guards. Only then did the 4 patriarchs and elders react. They hurriedly bowed to Ji Tianqing and saluted him. Greetings to Kenshin, Sama. The voices of the patriarchs and elders were clearly trembling. It was obvious that they were too excited to calm down. Previously, they had heard that Kenshin was an ancient pine grotto, but they hadn't been able to verify it. Their hearts were filled with anticipation and apprehension. Now that they saw Kenshin with their own eyes and felt Kenshin's divine pressure and powerful aura at close range, all their doubts were dispelled. Instead, they were filled with indescribable excitement and anticipation for the future. They knew very well that Kenshin's arrival meant that, the Reincarnation Island was about to change. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly, indicating that they could dispense with the formalities. He didn't exchange fake pleasantries with the four patriarchs and went straight to the point. I believe you already know that I came to the Reincarnation Island a few days ago. The reason why the previous battle ended so quickly was also because of me. I didn't show up because I wanted to keep it a secret and not affect the following plan. The four patriarchs had previously suspected that Kenshin had participated in that battle. That was why the Songhe tribe was safe and sound, annihilated the 8,000 soldiers, and killed the four reincarnation divine generals. Since Kenshin had admitted it himself, there was no doubt about it. The patriarchs could roughly guess that Kenshin's plan was to ambush the soldiers under Commander Mingi's command. Ji Tianqing continued. According to my calculations, Commander Mingi has already sent out the second batch of soldiers to besiege ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. It's almost time. Perhaps it's today, perhaps it's tomorrow, but I still have to lead the soldiers into battle. So, let's not waste any more time and get straight to business. As he spoke, he threw out a jade slip. It landed in the middle of the hall and floated in midair. The jade slip's position was very clever. It was the same distance away from the four patriarchs. This is the pledge of surrender. Those who wish to join the rebel alliance and follow me to overthrow the rule of the god of the underworld and save the billions of people of the Reincarnation Island must recite this pledge on the spot. Of course, I won't force you. If anyone doesn't wish to follow me, you may leave later. Ji Tianqing's tone was calm, and his attitude was also very indifferent. This was the attitude he showed, but it brought a lot of pressure to the patriarchs. Just as they analyzed when they reflected, it was now they who needed Kenshin's help, not Kenshin who needed to rely on them. Since the four patriarchs had delayed with Commander Mingi for several months without surrendering, they had long been regarded as enemies by Commander Mingi. Their escape route had been cut off. They could only rely on Kenshin. So, the pledge of surrender must be recited. But before reciting the pledge, the four patriarchs still wanted to struggle. May I ask Lord Kenshin, did you bring any soldiers from the boundless heaven continent on this trip to the Reincarnation Island? The hidden dragon patriarch, who had the most straightforward temperament, braced himself and asked first. His words were too clear, straightforward, and not tactful or respectful enough. When the other three patriarchs heard this, they all broke out in cold sweat for him and were secretly worried. Ji Tianqing glanced at the hidden dragon patriarch and said indifferently, "This is confidential. Only those who join the rebel alliance and recite the pledge of surrender are qualified to know." The hidden dragon patriarch choked on the spot and was speechless. Ji Tianqing's words were very reasonable, and he couldn't refute. But he just wanted to know, did Kenshin come alone, or did he come with an army? Then, he would be willing to recite the pledge of surrender. Another old man in a purple brocade robe was the patriarch of the quicksand region. After bowing, he asked, "Lord Kenshin, we have all heard of your fame and know that you are omnipotent. Now that you have come, the small reincarnation island is naturally at your fingertips. But this old man has a presumptuous request, not for myself, but to give an explanation to nearly 10,000 patriarchs. So, this old man boldly asks you, can you give our patriarchs a promise, even if it's just a verbal promise, there can be a guarantee." As soon as these words came out, the other patriarchs hurriedly nodded and echoed. To put it bluntly, they still didn't give up, and wanted Ji Tianqing to promise them some benefits and treatment. Just like the ancient patriarchs of the boundless heaven continent, those who took the lead to seek refuge with Kenshin could be given a domain and develop forces in the surrounding 10 domains, etc. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 42-24. The four patriarchs had a beautiful plan, but they had overlooked one fact. The boundless heaven continent was 5 times larger than Reincarnation Island. After Kenshin took control of the boundless heaven continent, the clans of the Rebel Alliance could all be given territories. However, Reincarnation Island only had 18 domains. If they were given a domain and allowed to develop their forces in the surrounding 10 domains, the boundless heaven continent wouldn't be a problem. In a few hundred years, the 5 ancient clans would be the 5 giants of Reincarnation Island, the kind that could cover the sky with one hand. At that time, not only would they be the most powerful forces, but they would also be the ones in charge. If there were more friction and disputes between the 5 ancient clans, it would inevitably lead to war. How could Kenshin be willing to see such a situation? Facing the eager gazes of the 4 patriarchs, Ji Tianqing replied expressionlessly, "The rebel alliance on Reincarnation Island has yet to be established, let alone defeat Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal. We have yet to capture Reincarnation Island and save hundreds of millions of people. What can I promise you? I won't make empty promises and give you any land or benefits. The only promise I can give you is that after we succeed and I take control of Reincarnation Island, I will reward you according to your merits." Knowing Kenshin's attitude, the 4 patriarchs were somewhat disappointed and disheartened. However, they also knew that the reason Kenshin had given them the cold shoulder for 6 hours was to make them understand this point. Since they weren't qualified to negotiate with Kenshin, they could only accept. Thus, the purple-robed patriarch of the Quicksand clan took the lead in expressing his stance. He bowed to Ji Tianqing and said, "Lord Kenshin's teachings are correct. What we should consider now is how to resist Commander Mingi and his subordinates and save the hundreds of millions of people on Reincarnation Island as soon as possible. The Quicksand clan is willing to follow Lord Kenshin and contribute to saving Reincarnation Island." After saying these beautiful words, the Quicksand clan patriarch took the lead in picking up the jade slip and began to read its contents. The other 3 patriarchs were stunned for a moment, and then their eyes flashed with annoyance. They all regretted that their reactions were too slow. They didn't rush to declare their allegiance before Patriarch Quicksand did. In any case, everyone had to submit to the Kenshin. Taking the initiative to declare their allegiance to the Kenshin would earn them a favorable impression. Unfortunately, it was too late for them to react. Their only chance to perform had been snatched away by the Quicksand Patriarch. The Hidden Dragon Patriarch secretly despised him and thought to himself, "This guy is really cunning. I have to be on guard against him in the future." Indeed, the 4 clans knew that the Pine Crane tribe had already latched onto Kenshin's leg, and that they had no chance. However, the patriarch of the Quicksand clan still took advantage of every opportunity and tried to gain a favorable impression of Kenshin. Perhaps in the future, Kenshin would take care of the Quicksand clan when it came time to reward them. Thinking of this, the other 3 patriarchs' minds became active. While they were secretly pondering and letting their imaginations run wild, the Quicksand Patriarch had already recited more than half of the Oath of Surrender. His face had already turned pale, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. His expression and eyes were somewhat unnatural. Obviously, he was frightened by the contents of the Oath of Surrender. All kinds of harsh and strict restrictions and regulations made him break out in cold sweat all over. He deeply realized that after reciting this Oath of Surrender, he would be completely trapped by Kenshin. From now on, he must be absolutely loyal to the Kenshin. He must not do anything that would harm the Kenshin's interests and safety. In other words, he must wholeheartedly work for the Kenshin. He must not be passive and slack off. Moreover, even if the Kenshin did not give him any benefits, and did not give the Quicksand clan any conditions or treatment, he could not complain. How is this an oath of allegiance and loyalty? It's clearly a contract to sell myself. This thought flashed through the Quicksand Patriarch's mind. He wanted to cry but had no tears. However, he had already recited half of the Oath of Surrender. He could not give up halfway and had to finish reciting it. Just like this, his tone became lower and lower, and his spirit became more and more dispirited. He weakly finished reciting the Oath of Surrender. His whole body lit up with a dazzling divine light, and a wisp of Taoist rhyme appeared above his head. There were also bursts of muffled thunder in the sky. The Oath of Surrender was thus established. Under the supervision and restriction of the heavenly Tao, there was no possibility of changing or destroying it. The other three patriarchs were also dumbfounded. They stared at the quicksand patriarch, at the divine light all over his body and the Taoist rhyme above his head. They had heard before that those forces in the boundless heaven continent who surrendered to the Kenshin had to recite the oath of surrender and be supervised and restricted by the heavenly Tao. This matter sounded very mysterious, but they all thought that Kenshin was gilding themselves, deliberately mystifying them, and packaging themselves as the spokesperson of the heavenly Tao. In addition, everyone only heard that the forces and powerhouses of the boundless heaven continent were forced to swear the oath of the heavenly Tao, but they had not heard of anyone being punished by the heavenly Tao. Over time, everyone did not take the oath of surrender too seriously. But now, the three patriarchs witnessed the changes in the quicksand patriarch with their own eyes and were dumbfounded on the spot. That dazzling divine light, rich Taoist rhyme, and the might of the heavenly Tao could not be faked. Only then did they understand that Kenshin could really use the power of the heavenly Tao, and the so-called oath of the heavenly Tao was also true. As bystanders, the three patriarchs could all feel the mighty might of the heavenly Tao. Their hearts were filled with uneasiness, shock, and fear. One could imagine how the quicksand patriarch, who was enveloped by the divine light and Taoist rhyme, felt at this moment under the heavenly Tao. He stood in place, stunned for a long time. It was not until the divine light and Taoist rhyme dissipated that he gradually came back to his senses. He did not raise his head to look at everyone's expressions. He silently bowed to Ji Tianqing and returned to his seat, remaining silent the entire time. It seemed that this old man still needed some time to recover. Next, it was the turn of the other three patriarchs. The three of them were all very nervous. They looked at each other, but no one went to take that jade slip. The main hall was very quiet, and the atmosphere was also somewhat awkward. However, the three of them could not be frozen here. No matter how terrifying the oath of surrender was, they had already expressed their intention to side with Kenshin. They could not go back on their words at the last minute. Even though Kenshin said that they would not be forced to side with them and swear allegiance. Those who were not willing to side with them could leave on their own later. However, they were not 3-year-old children. How could they dare to completely believe this sentence? If it were them, they would also not let the other party off so easily. After all, Kenshin's whereabouts were currently a huge secret. In order to be on the safe side and not leak this important information, they had to silence them. The three of them hesitated for 20 breaths. In the end, the hidden dragon patriarch was still young and impetuous. He took the lead and took the jade slip. He mustered up his courage, put on a posture of facing death calmly, and said the oath of surrender with a steady and powerful tone. Patriarch Song he couldn't help but laugh upon seeing this. He thought to himself, I'm only asking you to say the oath of surrender, not to go into battle to kill the enemy. Is there a need to make such a big fuss? Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 42-25. The patriarch of the Hidden Dragon clan quickly finished the pledge of surrender with a very solemn expression and an impassioned tone. When his whole body lit up with divine light, Taoist rhymes appeared above his head, and thunder sounded in the sky, his face turned pale and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. This was not because he was frightened by the content of the pledge of surrender, but because he was frightened by the horrible heavenly might. Fortunately, the heavenly way's vision only lasted for 10 breaths of time before dissipating. The patriarch of the Hidden Dragon clan also bowed to Ji Tianqing and silently returned to his seat, calming down his complicated and chaotic mood. Next, it was the turn of the patriarch of the Fang clan from the Tianfang territory and the patriarch of the Kuei clan from the Kuei mountain territory. Everyone's eyes were focused on them. No matter how nervous they were, they could only bite the bullet and recite the pledge of surrender. A quarter of an hour later, the two patriarchs also finished reciting the pledge of surrender and experienced the baptism and awe of the heavenly way's power. Like the previous two patriarchs, they became very silent. Of course, the four patriarchs no longer dared to have unrealistic thoughts, and they were all in awe of Ji Tianqing. However, their spirits were dispirited and listless, and they felt like crying but had no tears to shed. They felt so desolate that they had nothing to live for. For some reason, Patriarch Song He, who did not think much at first, did not sympathize with the four patriarchs. Instead, he was gloating. Even when he saw that Kenshin did not speak, as the most loyal minister of Kenshin on the Reincarnation Island, he took the initiative to say, "Congratulations to the four patriarchs for understanding your true intentions and joining the rebel alliance. In the future, when we work together, I hope you can help us. Of course, we are all subordinates of Lord Kenshin, and we should follow his orders. We must not overstep." The four patriarchs secretly scolded him for being a henchman, but they did not dare to show their dissatisfaction on the surface. They quickly nodded and said yes. Patriarch Song He read the contempt and disdain in the eyes of the four patriarchs, so he frowned and decided to add insult to injury. Before this, I think many people did not believe that the pledge of surrender made by Lord Kenshin was the so-called Heavenly Way's oath, and they did not believe that the power of the Heavenly Way would be used by Lord Kenshin. However, I would like to remind everyone that you must not have any wishful thinking. The legends are all true. Because today, Tian Fa's matter has been confirmed. At this point, Chief Song He paused for a moment and turned around to look at Ji Tianqing. He seemed to be asking Ji Tianqing if he could reveal the information about the captives. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly in approval. Encouraged, Patriarch Song He continued, "In the previous battle, Lord Kenshin led us to kill the four reincarnation divine generals and more than 5,000 soldiers. However, more than 2,000 soldiers surrendered. Lord Kenshin was merciful and did not kill those captives. Instead, he locked them up in our prison. Today, Lord Kenshin swore an oath to the Heavenly Tao to subdue those captives. They could be of use in the future." Unexpectedly, a few fearless captives actually took the opportunity to inform Commander Nether River after we left. However, as soon as they took out their communication jade slips and did not have time to input the message, they were struck by lightning out of nowhere and turned into ashes. Not even dregs were left. This is the consequence of violating the Heavenly Way's oath, and also the consequence of looking down on the power of the Heavenly Way. Chief Song He said with certainty. This matter was witnessed by more than 2,000 people. It was impossible to make up a story carelessly. The four patriarchs knew that it was true after hearing this. They immediately felt a chill down their spines and their hearts were filled with fear. Originally, they were still a little conflicted about the Heavenly Way's oath and silently muttered in their hearts about Kenshin's actions. However, after hearing this matter, they were so frightened that they broke out in cold sweat. They did not even dare to complain about Kenshin or disrespect Kenshin anymore. The facts prove that the Heavenly Way was always monitoring these people who had made the oath. However, there was no standard or indication for how the Heavenly Way judged that they had violated the oath and when the heavenly punishment would descend. Therefore, in order to protect their worthless lives and not die an unjust death, they could only behave themselves. They did not dare to test the authenticity of the Heavenly Way's oath at all. In fact, in order to win Kenshin's trust and wash away the suspicion of having resentment against Kenshin, the four patriarchs even scrambled to express their stance. "Lord Kenshin, please judge clearly. Heaven and earth can bear witness to our reverence and worship for you. Lord Kenshin, since we have made the oath, we will definitely follow your lead and will not dare to have the slightest disloyalty, as long as Lord Kenshin gives the order, even if we have to climb a mountain of swords or dive into a sea of fire, we will not hesitate." Words like this to express their loyalty kept coming out of the four patriarchs' mouths. Chief Song He looked at everyone with a smile and did not say anything else. The matter had been accomplished. He had played a small role in it and could be considered to have consolidated his position. When everyone quieted down, Ji Tianqing said, "Since the four patriarchs' loyalty is clear, then I can rest assured. Although your descendants have not arrived yet, you came at the right time. Soon, the second batch of troops sent by Commander Mingi should arrive. When that time comes, you will also have to participate in the battle and kill the enemy. Let me see your loyalty, strength, and means. Hearing that, the four patriarchs' expressions changed slightly, and a trace of annoyance flashed in their eyes. If they had known that Commander Mingi would send out the second batch of troops and would arrive in a few days, they would not have boasted and expressed their loyalty. Otherwise, they could have just watched from the sidelines and watched how Kenshin led the Songhe clan to defeat the second batch of troops. How safe would it have been to hide and watch the show? They just had to get themselves involved and be sent to the battlefield by Kenshin to kill the enemy. Sigh. Kenshin's tricks are too deep and impossible to guard against. There was also Song Hetao, this old man, who acted like a fawning lackey and sang the same tune as Kenshin, trapping them so miserably. Alright, the four patriarchs can withdraw and rest first and wait for my orders. After settling the matter, Ji Tianqing waved his big sleeves and dismissed the four patriarchs. Patriarch Songhe arranged a temporary place for them to rest. Patriarch Songhe had arranged for Ji Tianqing to live in a quiet, secluded, and undisturbed house. What he had arranged for the four patriarchs was to randomly find an empty house for them to stay in for the time being. Although the location of the house was very bad, there were houses, palaces, and clock towers all around. Fortunately, the house was still considered clean and there were also a few maids and guards. While the four patriarchs secretly cursed Patriarch Songhe for being stingy, they could only stay in the house to rest. After making arrangements for the four patriarchs, Patriarch Songhe hurried back to the meeting hall to see Ji Tianqing. He knew that Kenshin must have something to tell him. As expected. Ji Tianqing frowned and thought for a moment, then said, I have a faint premonition that the second batch of troops sent by Commander Mingi is already approaching ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. They should not be so rash as to attack directly. They will most likely send a group of scouts first to scout the situation in ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. After that, they will launch an attack. Pass down the order. Chapter 42-26. Ji Tianqing gave a series of orders to Patriarch Pine Crane. The main content of the orders was to strengthen the defenses of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven and not give the enemy scouts a chance to infiltrate. In order to make the act more realistic, all the guards guarding the entrance of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven withdrew into the Grotto Heaven. The formation at the entrance of the Grotto Heaven was also closed, as if they were going to defend ancient Pine Grotto Heaven to the death. This was the only way to make the army dispatched by Commander Styx believe that the Pine Crane clan had no confidence in facing Commander Styx head-on even with the secret help of the four clans. The second point was that the 3,000-plus disciples of the Pine Crane clan had to participate in this battle. Moreover, the 2,000-plus captives imprisoned in the prison had to be scattered and mixed into the Pine Crane clansmen's groups. Only this kind of mixed army, divided into several groups, would not cause chaos. The third point was that Ji Tianqing would personally set up another formation near the entrance of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. With the Pine Crane clan's God King and the four clan patriarchs, it would only take a few hours to complete. The most important point was that Ji Tianqing would still conceal himself in this battle. Unless absolutely necessary, he would not reveal his true identity. Regardless of whether Commander Styx's side was suspicious or not, he had to delay as much as possible. The longer Commander Styx saw through it, the easier it would be for his side to win, and the smaller the price they would have to pay. After listening to Ji Tianqing's orders, Patriarch Pine Crane understood his plan and thought process. This time, the second army dispatched to deal with Commander Styx would fight in ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. He was deeply puzzled and could not help but ask, Lord Kenshin, didn't we set up a formation outside the Grotto Heaven? Why not set up an ambush inside the formation to deal with the second army? Why do you have to work so hard and waste so much effort to set up a formation inside the Grotto Heaven? In the previous battle, Patriarch Pine Crane had tasted the sweetness of victory and also witnessed Kenshin's terrifying strength. With the experience of success, he naturally wanted to follow the prescribed order and replicate the success and victory of the last time. However, Ji Tianqing shook his head and explained, last time, the 8,000-strong army was not on guard. Of course, it was easy to deal with them. But this time, the second batch of soldiers was very vigilant and alert. They would not be easily ambushed. Furthermore, the number of enemy troops this time would definitely exceed 10,000, perhaps even double the previous number. This was a crucial battle for Commander Mingi to save face and intimidate the Reincarnation Island. They could only win and not lose. Therefore, I will put them into the ancient pine grotto, and then try to kill them. By doing so, we can also prevent the fish from escaping the net from leaking the news and my whereabouts. After listening to Ji Tianqing's explanation, Patriarch Song he finally understood the reason, and he couldn't help but nod in admiration. Lord Kenshin is indeed farsighted. His considerations are so comprehensive that not even a drop of water can leak out. It was this old man who was slow-witted. Please don't blame me. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, go and carry out your mission. Patriarch Song he didn't waste any more time. He quickly bowed and left to pass on the order. After a short half an hour, the guards guarding the entrance of the grotto had all retreated back to ancient Pine Grotto, and the defensive array of the grotto's entrance was also closed. At the same time, more than 3,600 Pine Crane clan members had all gathered in the square. More than 2,000 captives locked up in the prison had also arrived near the square. Under the command of Patriarch Song he and several elders, more than 2,500 captives began to integrate into the ranks of the Pine Crane clan members. Everyone carried out the order with high efficiency. In less than half an hour, they had completed the integration of 6,200 soldiers. They were temporarily divided into 3 teams, and were on standby in the square. Next, Patriarch Song he and several elders led these soldiers to the vicinity of the grotto's exit. The area within 20,000 miles of the exit was a flat grassland covered with green grass and wild flowers. Ji Tianqing had already led the 4 patriarchs of the Hidden Dragon clan, Fang clan, and the others to set up a divine array here. Ji Tianqing stood high in the sky and cast a spell. His entire body was shrouded in blazing white divine light, and no one could see his face and figure clearly. The 4 patriarchs and 4 elders stood in different positions, casting spells according to Ji Tianqing's instructions. After Patriarch Song he arrived with the army, he quickly joined the team that was setting up the grand array. Under the command of him and several elders, the 6,200 soldiers spread out, occupying the various nodes and positions of the array, and began to cast spells together. With the addition of the 6,200 soldiers, Ji Tianqing's speed in setting up the divine array was obviously several times faster. This time, the divine array he was going to set up was more marvelous and grander than the one he had set up outside the grotto. After all, there were more enemies to deal with this time, and they would be more powerful. Ji Tianqing was still setting up a high-grade king-level divine array, but with 3 grand arrays stacked together, its power was closer to that of a high-grade king-level divine array. Even if a peak divine king was trapped inside, it would be difficult for him to escape in a short period of time. In other words, even if Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal were to come personally, as long as they were trapped in the grand array, they would be buried here. Time passed quietly. Unknowingly, 8 hours had passed. This even more exquisite and magnificent formation, which covered an area of 20,000 miles in radius, was finally completed successfully. Everyone stopped casting spells and followed Ji Tianqing's orders, meditating where they were to recover their divine power as soon as possible. Next, all they had to do was wait. Patiently wait for the arrival of the second army. At the same time, the 500 assassins of the Hidden Death Group quietly arrived near ancient Pine Grotto. They were well trained and cooperated very well. They quickly spread out and investigated the situation within 100,000 miles of the grotto. As long as there were any clues, these assassins would not let go of them. The tense and oppressive 4 hours passed. After repeated searches, the 500 assassins finally checked the area within 100,000 miles, and confirmed that the area around the entrance of ancient Pine Grotto was safe. Moreover, the 2 mid-Divine King assassin commanders also felt that something was amiss. They felt that there was something wrong 20,000 miles away from the entrance of the grotto, and there was an unnatural power. However, they were not strong enough to find out the reason, and could only report it to the Blood Prison Marshal. After another 6 hours, the Blood Prison Marshal finally arrived with his army. The 9 divine warships stopped in the sky and remained invisible. The Blood Prison Marshal led more than 20 divine kings to personally investigate that strange place. After everyone brainstormed and investigated repeatedly, 2 hours later, the Blood Prison Marshal finally came to a conclusion. 20,000 miles away from the entrance of the grotto, there was a high king-grade grand array with a radius of 10,000 miles. The towering mountains and forests they saw were all illusions created by the grand array. In reality, the area within 10,000 miles had experienced a great battle and had long been scorched and ruined. This result made the Blood Prison Marshal and the others excited. They immediately concluded that this grand array was set up by the 5 ancient clans. The 4 divine generals of Samsara and the 8,000 soldiers were ambushed here. Chapter 42-27. Discovering an array with a radius of 10,000 miles and being able to see the ruins within the array was a great harvest. The army led by the Blood Prison Marshal had not even entered the ancient Pine Grotto heaven, but they were already able to obtain such a harvest. This caused everyone's morale to soar and their spirits to rise. Only unknown traps and schemes would cause people to worry and fear. Since he had found out about the Pine Crane clan's scheme and understood how the 5 clans had killed the 8,000 soldiers, the Blood Prison Marshal began to think of a countermeasure. After pondering for a moment, the smile on the Blood Prison Marshal's face disappeared. He vaguely felt that something was wrong and could not help but frown. Since the 5 clans used this array to successfully kill the 4 reincarnation divine generals and the 8,000 soldiers, why didn't they use the same trick again? This great array is still intact, but they gave up. The surrounding God King generals also realized this problem and hurriedly discussed it. Maybe the 5 clans felt that they had just won a battle and that we would not dare to invade. That's impossible. Even an idiot would know that we will definitely take revenge. It's impossible for the 5 clans to not be prepared. I'm guessing that they might feel that this formation isn't strong enough to fight against us. But this is still a bit far-fetched. Even if they could not use this array to resist us, they could still use it as the first line of defense and contend with us for a few rounds. That's right. If the 5 clans used this array to set up an ambush, we would not be defeated, but we would have to pay a great price. While the generals were discussing, the deputy commander of the assassin corps said to everyone, "We have already investigated clearly. There is no one within 150,000 miles around the ancient Pine Grotto heaven, not even a scout. The entrance to the ancient Pine Grotto heaven has already been closed, and there are no guards left behind. In other words, the Pine Crane clan is holed up in the ancient Pine Grotto heaven and should be stubbornly resisting until the end. However, we still do not know if the other 4 clans are also in the ancient Pine Grotto heaven." Hearing this, the generals and the God Kings all frowned, revealing anxious and worried expressions. Everyone knew that if the 2 sides fought outside, they would have an overwhelming advantage and would be able to defeat the 5 clans very quickly. However, the 5 clans were hiding in the ancient Pine Grotto heaven. With the protection of the ancient Pine Grotto heaven's eggshell, it was indeed a bit troublesome. Everyone put their heads together and racked their brains on how to break out of this situation. At this moment, the Blood Prison Marshal said with a solemn expression, "You've overlooked a detail. When was this 10,000-mile wide formation built under our feet built? Given the strength and number of experts of the 5 ancient clans, they would need at least 2 days to complete this array. However, before that battle, 2 messengers had entered the ancient pine grotto first. A few hours later, the 4 divine generals of Samsara and 8,000 soldiers arrived. Why didn't the 2 messengers notice anything unusual? This question stunned all the generals and god kings. Everyone understood Martial Blood Prison's meaning. Someone immediately asked, "Grand Marshal, you mean to say that this great array was completed after the 2 messengers entered ancient Pine Paradise and before the army of 8,000 arrived?" In that case, the 5 clans were able to set up this great formation in just a few hours. Someone immediately retorted, "That's impossible. How can the god kings of the 5 great clans have this ability?" Someone else raised his doubts and explained, "I also feel that it's impossible for the 5 great clans to set up this great formation in just a few hours. The most likely possibility is that they set up this great formation a few days in advance. The 2 messengers weren't very strong and they were careless when they passed by. That's why they didn't notice anything unusual." This inference was reasonable and won the approval of many god kings and generals. However, Martial Blood Prison added, "Don't forget that before the 2 messengers arrived at ancient Pine Paradise, the Pine Crane clan had no idea that the Grand Marshal was enraged and sent 4 divine generals of Samsara and 8,000 soldiers. It's impossible for the 5 great clans to predict the future and know that the 8,000 soldiers are about to move. This." For a moment, many god kings and generals were at a loss for words. A god king guessed a possibility and his expression turned grave. He asked, "Grand Marshal, do you mean that there's a trap here? That it's not just the other 4 clans that are helping the Pine Crane clan, but also other factions and experts?" Everyone knew that in the current Reincarnation Island, there was almost no faction that had the qualifications and courage to help the Pine Crane clan and confront Commander Styx. The so-called other powers and experts was just a euphemism. Everyone was well aware that this was referring to that world-renowned expert whose might shook the entire god realm. Kenshin. Everyone had discussed and suspected this in private, but they didn't dare to mention Kenshin's name in front of Commander Styx and Martial Blood Prison. Martial Blood Prison nodded and said without hesitation, "As of now, there's no news about Kenshin in the Boundless Heaven continent. Our scouts have searched the entire Reincarnation Island with all their might, but they haven't found any traces or whereabouts of Kenshin. However, we can't let down our guard. We can't rule out the possibility that Kenshin has already arrived at ancient Pine Paradise." The expressions of many god kings and generals changed. Fear and worry flashed through their eyes. Many people couldn't help but think that if Kenshin was really in ancient Pine Paradise, then all of them would be doomed. Seeing that everyone was silent and their morale was low, Martial Blood Prison said in a dignified tone, "I'm only suspecting this possibility, so I want everyone to be more careful. Next, we'll block the entrance to ancient Pine Paradise. There's no rush to make a move. We'll rest for 2 days. Assassin Group, continue to investigate the situation and collect information from all sides." "Understood." Everyone said in unison and was about to return to their respective teams and prepare to head to the entrance of ancient Pine Paradise. However, Martial Blood Prison ordered again, "There's no rush to move. Everyone, help me first and destroy this great formation. If we don't destroy this great formation, it'll always be a hidden danger." Thus, more than 10,000 soldiers stayed in the divine worship and waited for orders. More than 20 god kings joined forces and worked together with Martial Blood Prison to destroy the great formation that was 10,000 miles in radius. In the process of destroying the great formation, everyone had a deeper understanding of how exquisite and powerful this great formation was. This made Martial Blood Prison and the many god kings feel that this matter was even more fishy. They also became more suspicious. Apart from the 4 ancient clans, it was possible that Kenshin had already arrived at ancient Pine Paradise. Everyone became more and more worried, and their morale was even lower. Even though everyone worked together and spent half a day to finally destroy the great formation, they didn't feel the slightest bit of joy. They were all praying that Marshal Blood Prison's guess would not be correct. Otherwise, if they really faced the mysterious and powerful Kenshin, their side would definitely suffer a crushing defeat. Chapter 42-28. After destroying the array, the Blood Prison Marshal took the fleet and rushed to ancient Pine Paradise in a grandiose manner. When they arrived near the entrance, the fleet stopped in the sea of clouds and became invisible, waiting silently. The Blood Prison Marshal led the God Kings out of the ship and personally observed the Grotto Heaven's entrance. Just as the Hidden Death group had reported, the Grotto Heaven's entrance was empty. There was not even a shadow. The formation at the entrance had already been closed and was hidden in the sea of clouds. Under such circumstances, it would be difficult for the Blood Prison Marshal to kill his way into ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, regardless of which factions and experts were inside. Even without the help of the Kenshin and the 4 ancient clans, the Pine Crane clan's 8,000 people and the protection of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven would be able to stall for 3 to 5 days. Fortunately, the Blood Prison Marshal was an excellent and cautious commander. He would not underestimate the enemy, nor would he be eager for quick success. Without knowing the situation in ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, he was not in a hurry to attack. First, he had 18,000 soldiers guard the Grotto Heaven's entrance and rest in the ship. 500 assassins from the Hidden Death group were also monitoring the movements within 100,000 miles, receiving information from the intelligence organization at any time. The Blood Prison Marshal and more than 20 God King experts stood in the sea of clouds and observed for a long time. He pointed at the empty sea of clouds and asked everyone, "If you want to attack ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, you must first destroy the formation. Ben Shui will do it himself, and with the help of all of you, how long will it take to destroy it?" The place he was pointing at was the peak of the giant mountain. There was originally a plaza and altar, as well as a spatial door. Although the formation was invisible, the God Kings could still see the general outline with their abilities and secret techniques. Hearing the Blood Prison Marshal's question, the God Kings and generals discussed for a while before someone answered, "Marshal, if we use all our strength to destroy the formation, we can destroy it in 2 days at the fastest and 4 days at the longest. And this is taking into account that the Pine Crane clan is in the Grotto Heaven and using all their strength to support the formation." The Blood Prison Marshal nodded slightly and asked, "What if the other 4 clans are also in the Grotto Heaven and have 5,000 troops to help the Pine Crane clan?" This. The general hesitated for a moment before replying in an uncertain tone, "It will take at least 3 days. If it is slow, perhaps 5 or 6 days. The Blood Hell Marshal pondered for a moment and gave the order to his subordinates. "Pass down Ben Shui's order. Gather at least 4,000 men from the surrounding 4 regions and send reinforcements as soon as possible." This. The generals were all dumbfounded. The God Kings all looked at each other. Everyone knew that the Blood Prison Marshal was very cautious and had rarely been defeated in battle. But wasn't this too cautious? They already had 18,000 soldiers on their side. Even if the 5 ancient clans emptied their pockets, they wouldn't be able to gather so many soldiers. It was clearly a matter that was in the bag, so why did the Grand Marshal still need to transfer 4,000 soldiers as reinforcements? Wouldn't this show that they were too weak and lacked confidence? Furthermore, the true elites were all gathered in Yudu. The soldiers left behind to guard the various regions were all weaker. Even if they gathered 4,000 soldiers at the last moment, they might not be able to unleash much combat power. Even though the generals and God Kings were grumbling in their hearts, they didn't dare to disobey the Blood Prison Marshal's order. Some even had selfish thoughts in their minds, so they didn't raise any objections. They even agreed with the Blood Prison Marshal's decision. After all, it was better to have 4,000 soldiers who were slightly weaker and didn't have any background as cannon fodder. This way, they could also reduce the casualties of their subordinates. Inside the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. Ji Tianqing and the 3,000-plus disciples of the Pine Crane clan were still waiting patiently in the formation. The patriarchs and elders of the four clans were also meditating in the array, their hearts gradually calming down. In the beginning, they were still worried about whether their lives would be in danger when the battle really started. But for some unknown reason, after staying under the sword god's skin for a few hours, they inexplicably felt at ease, steady, and even more confident and emboldened. A few hours ago, when the Blood Prison Marshal led many god kings to destroy the formation outside the Grotto Heaven, Ji Tianqing had already sensed it. The formation that he had set up would naturally be sensed. Furthermore, he used some small tricks left behind in the formation to detect the number and strength of the people who were breaking the formation. More than 1100 years ago, the Blood Prison Marshal participated in the siege of the Kenshin. Therefore, Ji Tianqing had an impression of the Blood Prison Marshal's divine power aura. When the Blood Prison Marshal took the lead to destroy the formation, he sensed it almost immediately. I originally thought that Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal would defend Yudu to the death. This time, they would send capable generals to lead the army to take revenge. I didn't expect the Blood Prison Marshal to personally lead the army over. From this, it can be seen how much Commander Mingi cares about his face and how eager he is to take revenge. However, this is also an unexpected surprise for us. Since the Blood Prison Marshal has come, then don't think about leaving alive. Of the two rulers of the Reincarnation Island, let's kill one first. The arrival of the Blood Prison Marshal was excellent news for Ji Tianqing. However, he was not in a hurry to tell this news to his soldiers and the 5 patriarchs. Because he knew that the Blood Prison Marshal was not a reckless person and had always been cautious in his actions. He speculated that the Blood Prison Marshal would not attack immediately after arriving at the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. He would definitely set up camp first and investigate the situation before making a move. It would take at least 1 or 2 days before the Blood Prison Marshal would lead the army to attack. At that time, it would take another 2 or 3 days to break through the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. In the end, he still had to wait 3 or 4 days before he could kill the Blood Prison Marshal. Since that was the case, Ji Tianqing was not in a hurry and simply meditated and cultivated in the formation. The development of the matter was just as Ji Tianqing expected. In the next 2 days, the Blood Prison Marshal and his army did not move. On the evening of the 3rd day, 4 troops rushed to the entrance of the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven from all directions at an extremely fast speed. These 4 troops were the soldiers that had been temporarily gathered from the surrounding 4 regions. Each troop had about 1,000 people. The leaders were several godly kings and the rest were godly lords. Of course, the ratio of upper godly lords was very low. Most of them were middle and lower godly lords. To the godly kings and generals, only upper godly lords could be called elite soldiers and were the main force against the 5 great clans. Towards the arrival of these 4,000 soldiers, the generals and godly kings reacted indifferently. Only the Blood Prison Marshal had an amiable attitude and expressed his welcome and praise to these soldiers. The 4,000 soldiers lived in a remote corner and had low status. When had they ever seen such a scene? Hearing the praise and encouragement of the Blood Prison Marshal, they were moved and their blood boiled. Thus, the Blood Prison Marshal ordered the attack and let the 4,000 soldiers take the lead in attacking the Grotto Heaven's entrance. They did not hesitate to agree. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 42-29. The 4,000 soldiers were stationed in their respective domains, and the strongest and most powerful people they could see in their lives were the domain lords of their respective domains. They were not qualified to see overlords like the Blood Prison Marshal and Commander Styx. Now, not only did the 4,000 soldiers see the Blood Prison Marshal in person, but they also received praise and encouragement. Naturally, their blood boiled and they were inexplicably excited. When the Blood Prison Marshal gave the order to attack, they had the mentality of soldiers dying for their bosom friends. They attacked the array at the Grotto Heaven's entrance without any regard for their own safety. Thousands of dazzling pillars of light and the shadows of swords and sabers bombarded the empty clouds. Rumble. With an earth-shattering explosion, the clouds within a few hundred miles dissipated, and a huge five-colored wall of light appeared. Inside the wall of light was a huge mountain peak. There was a plaza and an altar at the peak, but no one was guarding it. There was no need for the blood prison marshal to boost their morale. The 4,000 soldiers had to do their best and attack with all their might. Bang! 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 Rumble. Divine technique shadows that blotted out the sky constantly bombarded the five-colored wall of light, causing a series of earth-shattering explosions. The five-colored wall of light trembled and flashed with divine light, but no cracks appeared. The 4,000 soldiers attacked for 15 minutes without stopping, as if they did not know the concept of fatigue. Not far away, nearly 30 god kings and generals watched this scene expressionlessly. In their view, it was natural for the 4,000 soldiers to be the vanguard and cannon fodder. There was no response from the ancient Pine Grotto heaven at present, but soon, the Pine Crane clan would launch a counterattack. At that time, the 4,000 soldiers would pay with their lives. As expected. Inside the ancient Pine Grotto heaven, the deacons of the Pine Crane clan were monitoring the situation outside through the array at the Grotto heaven's entrance. When they found that an army was attacking the array at the Grotto heaven's entrance, they immediately cast spells to support the array and reported the situation to Patriarch Pine Crane. When Patriarch Pine Crane received the news, he immediately became spirited and reminded all his disciples to stay alert. Commander Styx's lackeys have finally launched their attack. Everyone, prepare for battle. Patriarch Pine Crane's shout rang out in the array, and it immediately received a response from the 3,000 Pine Crane disciples. Everyone stopped meditating and took out their divine weapons to prepare for battle. Even though the Pine Crane clansmen wanted to open the Grotto heaven's entrance and let the Blood Hell Marshal and the army into the Grotto heaven. At that time, once the army entered the ambush circle, the Pine Crane race could surround and attack with all their might and end the battle as soon as possible. However, directly opening the entrance to the heavenly abode was too fake. It would definitely arouse the other party's suspicion. If the Pine Crane tribe did not defend and allowed the other party to break through the Grotto heaven's entrance, it would seem intentional. If the commander of the army was cautious enough, he would still have doubts. Therefore, in order to successfully carry out the plan and annihilate the invading enemies, the Pine Crane tribe could only cooperate with the enemy to put on a show. Patriarch Song he ordered several elders to lead 10 deacons and 1,000 disciples to the entrance to support the formation and resist the enemy's fierce attacks. 1,000 Pine Crane disciples channeled their divine power into the formation to strengthen it. Several elders and 10 deacons also controlled the formation to launch a counterattack. Swish! Swish! Soon, thousands of divine light blades, wind, fire, and lightning burst out of the five-colored wall that looked like a sky canopy. It poured down on the 4,000 soldiers like a flood. Even though the 4,000 soldiers reacted quickly enough and dodged in time, they were not spared. Bam! 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 Kaboom! With a series of dull explosions, more than 1,000 soldiers who were unable to retreat in time were drowned by the divine light, wind, fire, and lightning. The power of a king-level high-grade divine formation was indeed not to be underestimated. At least 800 middle-grade and low-grade divine lords were beaten until they were covered in wounds and blood. They let out shrill screams. More than 400 people were directly killed by the divine light and turned into ashes. Not even their corpses were left. The 2,000 soldiers who were lucky enough to escape shuddered when they saw this scene. Their high morale also decreased greatly. They immediately became much more clear-headed. Some of the smarter ones already understood why the Blood Hell Marshal was so amiable to them and even let them lead the charge. He wanted them to be cannon fodder. But it was useless for these people to understand. They could not disobey the Blood Hell Marshal's orders, nor could they flee at the last minute. Now, even if they knew that they would die in battle, they could only brace themselves and charge forward. Soldiers, do not be discouraged, do not be afraid, and do not retreat. The Blood Hell Marshal looked at the somewhat panicked soldiers and shouted in a dignified tone, "In order to protect our home and exterminate the rebels, what is this little sacrifice? We soldiers should be bathed in blood and fight to the death on the battlefield. Everyone, do not worry and attack. Ben Shui will remember each and every one of you. If you die in battle, Ben Shui will give you posthumous honors and treat your families well." As the commander of the army, the Blood Hell Marshal had led troops to tens of thousands of battles. He naturally knew what his soldiers were thinking. His words had a great motivational effect on the soldiers. The low morale of the 3,000 soldiers immediately recovered and returned to their peak condition. Everyone had the determination and attitude to die for justice as they shouted and attacked again. Kill! Brothers, let's go! Soon, the divine spell shadows that blotted out the sky and covered the earth once again bombarded the five-colored light wall like a flood. Loud rumbling sounds rang out again. The five-colored light wall began to tremble again, flashing with divine light. Inside the grotto heaven, the disciples of the Pine Crane clan also felt the pressure and continued to cast spells to support the formation. The elders and deacons calmly cast spells and controlled the formation to launch a counterattack, continuously exhausting the enemy's forces. As time passed, the casualties of the 3,000 soldiers attacking the grotto heaven's entrance continued to increase. The Blood Hell Marshal remained calm as he watched the soldiers being killed one after another or withdraw from the battle with heavy injuries and retreat to a distant place to heal their wounds. However, the generals beside him could not help but suggest when they saw the 4,000 soldiers slowly dwindle to 2,000. "Marshal, we can't let those soldiers keep attacking while our army stands by and does nothing. If this continues, the remaining 2,000 soldiers will be conflicted. Moreover, their combat strength is slightly low. Wasting them like this won't do much good. Marshal, it seems that the Pine Crane clan's counterattack is not strong enough. Our soldiers can take action now." These generals still had a bit of conscience and spoke a few words of fairness. The Blood Hell Marshal finally nodded in agreement and waved his hand to issue the order. Thus, the four generals bowed and accepted the order. They led the 8,000 soldiers to join the ranks attacking the grotto heaven's entrance. The four divine warships of the 8,000 soldiers also fired at full power and bombarded the five-colored light wall. Chapter 42:30. As soon as the Blood Hell Marshal sent out 8,000 troops to participate in the battle, the Pine Crane clan members in the grotto heaven felt the pressure increase exponentially. The five-colored light wall at the entrance of the grotto heaven also trembled violently and emitted crisp cracking sounds. Cracks were about to appear. It was very difficult for the 1,000 disciples to hold on. Even if they resisted with all their might, the army would probably enter the grotto heaven within a few hours. Therefore, Patriarch Pine Crane gave the order to send another 1,000 disciples and 10 deacons to resist the army's attack. With the addition of 1,000 Pine Crane clan members, the pressure on everyone was greatly reduced and they felt much more relaxed. Both sides entered a stalemate again. A few elders and 10 deacons continued to control the defensive formation to slaughter the army outside. Ji Tianqing, Patriarch Pine Crane, and the other 4 patriarchs were watching from the sidelines and waiting quietly. Everyone knew that the battle had just begun. The Blood Hell Marshal's side hadn't used all their strength and was still cautiously probing. If the Pine Crane clan used all their strength now, it would definitely arouse the suspicion of the other party. Once the Blood Hell Marshal became suspicious, it was very likely that he would pause the attack and delay for a few more days. The longer this battle dragged on, the greater the impact on Ji Tianqing's plan. At the very least, it would be very difficult for the army of 18,000 to all step into the trap. It would be an extravagant hope to catch all of them in one fell swoop and not leak any information. This battle wasn't something that could end just by fighting with all their might. The tactical response was actually Ji Tianqing trying to figure out the Blood Hell Marshal's mentality. As long as he could grasp the Blood Hell Marshal's mentality and guess the Blood Hell Marshal's thoughts and countermeasures, he would be able to defeat the other party. Unknowingly, a day had passed. The 8,000 soldiers under the Blood Hell Marshal and the 4,000 soldiers who were treated as cannon fodder had been attacking for a day. It could be said that they were exhausted and suffered heavy casualties. The 4,000 soldiers had naturally become cannon fodder. 80% of them had been sacrificed, and the remaining 20% had been seriously injured and had retreated to a distance to recuperate. At least for a few months, they would have no combat strength and would not be able to participate in the battle. Therefore, the Blood Hell Marshal gave them the order to treat their injuries within 2 days and return to their respective areas. After the battle was over, the Blood Prison Marshal would reward them according to their merits. The 800 soldiers who were lucky enough to survive believed that the Blood Prison Marshal wouldn't lie to them and felt slightly comforted. However, no one knew if the Blood Prison Marshal would still have the opportunity to reward these soldiers after the war. In addition, of the 8,000 soldiers who joined the battle in the second batch, more than 1,000 were killed and more than 2,000 were injured. The more heavily injured soldiers had all left the battlefield to recuperate. The Blood Prison Marshal could only send 2 more divine generals to lead 4,000 soldiers into battle. As a result, the number of people participating in the battle remained at around 9,000. There were still 6,000 soldiers who had yet to join the battle. They were resting and waiting for orders within the divine warships. Since the Blood Hell Marshal had already invested so many troops, he believed that the Pine Crane clan could no longer resist. The facts were indeed so. The first 2 batches of disciples dispatched by the Pine Crane clan were indeed weak, and it was difficult for them to continue. Left with no choice, Patriarch Song he could only send another 1,000 men as reinforcements. A total of 3,000 people worked together to cast spells to increase the strength of the defensive formation. Only then could they barely resist the enemy's strong attack and not collapse immediately. If it weren't for the 2,000 captives that Ji Tianqing had taken in, the Pine Crane clan would only have a few hundred disciples left after sending out 3,000 people to participate in the battle. They were practically at the end of their rope. At this moment, the 2,000 captives and 3,000 Pine Crane disciples made a total of 6,000 people. Even if 3,000 people joined the battle, there would still be 3,000 people left in the trap formation to wait for orders. Patriarch Song he believed that this was something that the enemy wouldn't expect. Late at night, the offensive and defensive battle between the two sides was still playing out. Patriarch Song he headed to the center of the formation to ask Ji Tianqing if they were still going according to the plan and if there were any changes that needed to be made. Ji Tianqing ended his cultivation and replied with a calm expression, "We are still going according to the plan. Currently, the enemy has already lost more than 6,000 soldiers, but there are still nearly 10,000 people participating in the battle. They have already used 70 to 80% of their strength, so they will guess that we have also used the same amount of troops. Their wariness will also be greatly reduced. From tomorrow onwards, let the disciples hold back a little and don't use their full strength. In this way, the formation at the entrance of the grotto heaven will constantly be broken and repaired again. When the time comes, the speed of repairing the formation will slow down and the formation will become riddled with holes until it is completely broken. This process will take 1 more day. When they finally break through the entrance of the grotto heaven in the early morning of the 3rd day, their wariness will be reduced by 70 to 80% and they will rush in. At that time, the real decisive battle will begin, and their nightmare will begin. Patriarch Song he didn't doubt Ji Tianqing's analysis at all. He nodded expectantly and said, "This subordinate understands." As expected. From the morning of the 2nd day onwards, the Pine Crane clan's strength had clearly weakened and they lacked the strength to continue fighting. The power of the defensive formation had clearly weakened, and the multicolored light wall had also become dim. The divine power was no longer abundant. Of the more than 9,000 soldiers attacking the entrance of the grotto heaven with all their strength, several hundred were injured or killed. Only 9,000 people were still fighting. However, they saw the hope of breaking through the ancient pine grotto heaven. They were all in high spirits and launched an all-out attack. Cracks constantly appeared on the multicolored light wall, which was then repaired by the Pine Crane clan. However, it didn't take long for more cracks to appear. As time passed, more and more cracks appeared, and the speed of the Pine Crane clan's repair became slower and slower. The soldiers under the command of the Blood Helm Marshal couldn't see the situation in the grotto heaven, nor could they see the expressions of the Pine Crane disciples. However, they guessed that the Pine Crane disciples must be very angry, sullen, and flustered. However, the truth was exactly the opposite. The 3,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives who had participated in the battle had long been replaced. They were circulating their martial arts to regulate their breathing and restore their divine power. The 3,000 disciples and captives who had been resting in the trap formation entered the battle and controlled the defensive formation unhurriedly. The situation was developing step by step according to Ji Tianqing's speculation. A day passed. By the time it was late at night, the formation at the entrance of the ancient pine grotto heaven was already full of scars and holes. The multicolored light wall was full of gaps and cracks. The speed of repair was far from keeping up with the speed of destruction. Everyone knew that the grotto heaven's entrance was about to be broken, and the true decisive battle was about to arrive. Many generals and god kings arrived before the blood prison marshal. They were excited as they rubbed their fists and asked to fight. "Marshal, the grotto heaven's entrance is about to be breached. We will be able to enter the ancient pine grotto heaven in 4 hours at the latest. Marshal, please allow this general to take the lead. The soldiers who participated in breaking the formation have worked hard and contributed greatly. They have used up too much energy. Let them bring up the rear and take the opportunity to rest. This general has led 2,000 elite soldiers to rest in the divine worship. Please allow us to be the vanguard." Chapter 42-31. In the past 2 days, when the army was attacking the grotto heaven's entrance, these 6,000 soldiers were resting in the divine warships and had no intention of asking for battle. But now, the defensive formation at the grotto heaven's entrance was about to be breached, and these 6,000 soldiers were scrambling to ask for battle. Their goal was very simple. They wanted to take advantage of the situation and get the credit. Although the previous 2 days of attack and sacrifice were valuable, there was not much credit to speak of. But being the first to enter ancient Pine Grotto Heaven and take the lead in killing the Pine Crane clan's disciples was a great merit. Not to mention, only 8,000 of the 9,000 soldiers attacking the Grotto Heaven's entrance were left. Those 8,000 soldiers were already exhausted, but these 6,000 elite soldiers were conserving their strength, ready to go. They believed that the Blood Prison Marshal would agree to their request and send them as the vanguard to attack ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. Sure enough. The Blood Prison Marshal nodded in agreement after a little consideration. He looked at the 3 captains, who were eager to give it a try, and said with a dignified tone, "The other captains have been fighting a bloody battle for 2 days, but you have been recuperating and building up your strength. Ben Shui hopes that you can understand that as the vanguard, you must show an indomitable spirit and determination that does not fear death. After attacking ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, Ben Shui will personally supervise the army. If anyone dares to take a step back, they will be executed without mercy." Clearly, the Blood Prison Marshal had expected that the bloody battle would only begin after attacking ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. When the time came, the battle would be even crueler. It would not be so easy for these 6,000 soldiers to get credit. The 3 generals understood the meaning of the Blood Prison Marshal's words. Their expressions turned cold, and they saluted solemnly, saying, "Please rest assured, Grand Marshal. We will not fail our mission. The Blood Prison Marshal nodded in satisfaction and motioned for the three generals to withdraw. The three generals gathered their troops and got into a charging formation outside the Grotto Heaven's entrance, ready to go. Not long after, the defensive formation of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven emitted cracking sounds, and shards of divine light filled the sky. Under everyone's gaze, the defensive formation could not bear the burden and finally shattered, collapsing on the spot. The sky was filled with fragments of divine light, and a gap with a radius of more than 10 miles appeared in the formation. The blurry scene inside the ancient pine paradise could be vaguely seen. Many soldiers could see that there were nearly 3,000 disciples of the Pine Crane clan in the cave. All of them looked haggard and disheveled, with frightened and panicked expressions on their faces. Ha ha ha. We've finally breached it. Everyone, charge. What are you waiting for? Charge in and kill all the Pine Crane bastards. Ancient Pine Paradise is filled with traitors. Kill them all, leave no one alive. The soldiers under the command of the Blood Prison Marshal all cheered excitedly, shouting that they wanted to charge in. In their eyes, once the defensive formation of the Grotto Heaven was broken, the Pine Crane disciples would be like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. They could do whatever they wanted. Although the 8,000 soldiers had been attacking continuously for 2 days, they had used up a lot of their divine power and felt very tired. However, victory and merit were right in front of them. They all rushed forward without regard for their own safety, wanting to be the first to rush into ancient Pine Paradise. However, the 6,000 soldiers who had been accumulating power and waiting were even faster than them. Whoosh! Whoosh! The 6,000 soldiers were divided into 3 groups. They cut through the sky as fast as lightning, passing through the gap in the formation, taking the lead to rush into ancient Pine Paradise. They were silent and did not shout any slogans. However, they were all holding back a powerful burst of power. Their bodies were brimming with blazing killing intent. These 6,000 soldiers were not only powerful and majestic slaughterers, but they were also fast as lightning. They were the vanguard that launched a sudden attack. The 8,000 soldiers were dumbfounded. When they came to their senses, they all showed angry and unconvinced expressions and secretly cursed. Damn it! We actually let those bastards get ahead of us. 2 days ago, when we attacked the Grotto Heaven formation, they stayed in the divine worship to rest. Now, they want to take the lead and take the credit? Humph. We watered and fertilized, and they came to pick the fruit. No, we have to get an explanation for this. Everyone, don't be impulsive. Since they dared to do this, they must have been instructed by the Grand Marshal. Don't just stand there. We can discuss this after the battle. We have to charge in too. We can't let them get ahead of us. There were finally some people among the soldiers who understood. Now was not the time to bicker about the credit. The most important thing was to rush into ancient Pine Paradise and kill the enemy. Only then could they obtain credit. Kill. Charge. Don't let them get ahead of us. It's our credit. We can't run away. The Grand Marshal is watching us. Everyone, don't embarrass the general. The many soldiers shouted and waved their weapons. They charged into ancient Pine Paradise without any regard for their own safety. After a short while, all 14,000 soldiers had entered ancient Pine Grotto. At this moment, the Blood Prison Marshal led over 20 god kings and generals through the gap at a moderate pace, entering ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. There were no soldiers left to guard the gap in the formation. The Blood Hell Marshal felt that there was no need. After all, a gap of several dozen miles could not be repaired in a short period of time. Long before the formation was breached, the Pine Crane disciples and the 2,000 captives had already made preparations for battle. The 3,000 disciples who had cast spells to support the formation pretended to be panicked and they saw the formation being breached. However, they were actually very calm inside. When they saw the 6,000 fast and murderous vanguard army charging into ancient Pine Paradise, they symbolically resisted for a moment before retreating in a sorry state. The 6,000 vanguard army's murderous intent was too strong. They were also very anxious. They only wanted to kill all the Pine Crane disciples as soon as possible and take the credit. When they saw the 3,000 Pine Crane disciples fleeing in a sorry state, their morale was even higher. They chased even more ferociously. However, they did not notice a detail. The 3,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives who seemed to be retreating in a panic were actually not in a mess. Instead, they were retreating into the trap formation in an orderly manner. On the other side, the 3,000 disciples who were meditating and recuperating in the trap formation had already made preparations and were ready to attack. Even the Pine Crane Patriarch, a few elders, and the patriarchs of the 4 ancient clans had taken out their weapons and were ready for battle. Finally, after more than 300 of the 3,000 Pine Crane disciples were killed, the remaining 2,600 managed to escape into the range of the trap formation. On the surface, it looked like they were flying over a grassland. The 6,000 vanguard army with murderous intent did not have any scruples or defenses. They surged forward like a torrent. There was no doubt that they had also entered the grassland and stepped into the trap formation. However, Ji Tianqing was not in a hurry to make a move. He, the 3,000 Pine Crane disciples, and the elders of the 4 ancient clans were under the cover of the formation. They were not discovered by the enemy. The Pine Crane Patriarch and the elders' hearts were in their throats. They could not wait to activate the formation immediately and kill the 6,000 vanguard army. However, Ji Tianqing had to wait for the remaining 8,000 vanguard army to enter the trap before he could kill them all. Chapter 42-32. The 3,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives who were in charge of acting as bait were also on tenterhooks. They originally thought that after luring the 6,000 vanguard troops into the trap, they would have completed their mission and would be able to counterattack. However, that was not the case. From the very beginning, Kenshin had a plan. They wanted to capture the enemy in one fell swoop and try their best not to leak any information. Therefore, they could only wait for the 8,000 vanguard troops and the many godly king experts to arrive before they could launch a counterattack. This put the 3,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives in a difficult position. They could not keep retreating and running. Otherwise, by the time the 8,000 vanguard troops entered the trap, they would have already fled 20,000 miles away and left the trap's range. In order to keep the 14,000 vanguard troops in the trap, the 3,000 Pine Crane disciples could only slow down and turn around to block the vanguard troops' charge. Bam! 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 Kill! Brothers, hold on. Don't retreat anymore. The two sides engaged in close combat within the formation. Divine light collided and a series of loud, dull sounds erupted that shook the heavens and the earth. The 3,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives tried their best and did not fight the vanguard troops head-on. However, the enemy had doubled in number and they were still at a disadvantage. Very soon, the number of casualties increased drastically. Fortunately, this situation did not last for long. After a short while, the 8,000 vanguard troops roared and charged over. Seeing the 6,000 vanguard troops besieging the 3,000 Pine Crane disciples, how could they just stand by and watch? Of course, they charged over as quickly as possible and surrounded the Pine Crane disciples to kill as many of them as possible. Just like that, after 6 or 7 breaths, the 8,000 vanguard troops all entered the trap. More than 10,000 vanguard troops gathered in the sky above the 20,000-mile grassland and launched a one-sided siege. The 3,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives were in despair. Their mentality was about to collapse. They were already besieged by 14,000 vanguard troops and their numbers were decreasing sharply. However, Kenshin still did not make a move. Could it be that Kenshin would only make a move after they were all killed? What was Kenshin waiting for? At this moment, the Blood Prison Marshal led more than 20 godly kings and generals and flew over the sky at a moderate pace. They arrived above the grassland. They assumed the posture of high and mighty powerhouses. They only glanced at the battle situation on the grassland, and then turned their gazes to the depths of ancient pine paradise. The various god kings and generals began to discuss among themselves. Why were there only 3,000 disciples from the pine crane race intercepting them? What about the rest of them? What about the reinforcements sent by the other 4 ancient clans? Could it be that they were all holed up in the pine crane divine palace and had no intention of coming out to fight? Meanwhile, inside the trap formation, Patriarch Song He, the elders, and the patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans paled. Everyone looked at the Blood Prison Marshal who was surrounded by so many god kings. They immediately showed respect and worry. Blood Hell Marshal? Oh my God! Why is he here? The Blood Prison Marshal actually personally led an army to attack ancient Pine Paradise. Commander Mingi's determination to take revenge is so firm. He actually sent the Blood Prison Marshal to personally lead the troops. The 5 patriarchs and elders were filled with shock and disbelief. But after the shock and fear, everyone came back to their senses and recovered their confidence and composure. After all, with the Kenshin presiding over this place, what did they have to be afraid of? Just as the 5 patriarchs calmed down, Ji Tianqing had already moved with lightning speed and fully activated the trap formation. After all, the Blood Prison Marshal and more than 20 god kings and generals had also stepped into the range of the trap. Everyone was here. Whoosh! The grassland that was in chaos due to the fierce battle of more than 10,000 soldiers suddenly lit up with 5-colored divine light that shot into the sky. In just an instant, a 5-colored barrier of light with a radius of 20,000 miles appeared out of thin air and enveloped this area. This was not a newly activated formation, but a formation that had been in an invisible state finally revealed its true appearance. The 5-colored barrier of light was more than a foot thick and was formed by 3 high-grade king-level divine formations. Its power was very close to that of a supreme-grade king-level formation. The formation rapidly operated and released invisible divine power that fiercely suppressed the 14,000 soldiers under the Blood Prison Marshal's command. Within a radius of 20,000 miles, within the chaotic 10,000 soldiers, the divine power released by the formation would not harm its own side and would accurately suppress the enemy. This required Ji Tianqing to have extremely high control of the formation and reach the level of minute detail. Without a doubt, his formation skills had reached the pinnacle, so of course he could do it. The fierce battle in the field instantly stopped. The 2,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives who were lucky enough to survive retreated into the distance in shock, panting in panic. The 14,000 soldiers under the Blood Prison Marshal's command stopped attacking in panic and shock. They all looked up at the sky. Seeing the 5-colored barrier of light and feeling the invisible, terrifying pressure, everyone trembled in fear. The circulation of their divine power became sluggish, and they even found it difficult to breathe. Looking at this scene, even a fool would know that they had fallen into a trap. They had been ambushed by the Pine Crane clan. Immediately after, the 5 patriarchs and elders, as well as the other 3,000 disciples and captives who had been conserving their strength, appeared one after another. In addition to the 2,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives who were still panting, there were a total of 5,000 people. They were scattered around the formation and surrounded the Blood Prison Marshal's army of 14,000. That's right, it was 5,000 people surrounding 14,000 people. The moment the 5-colored barrier appeared, the Blood Prison Marshal's eyelids twitched violently. An extremely uneasy sense of danger arose in his heart. However, he was very shrewd. His expression was calm, and he did not reveal the slightest hint of panic. Instead, the god kings and generals beside him were frightened by the sudden appearance of the 5-colored barrier. They revealed shocked and worried expressions. However, when everyone saw that there were only about 5,000 people in the ambush, they all heaved a sigh of relief. The blood prison marshal was also slightly relieved. His gaze swept across the 5 patriarchs, and the corners of his mouth curled into a sneer. Pine Hetao, Ben Shui remembers that you don't seem to be very good at arranging troops, but recently, you have set up 2 formations in succession. First, you used the formation outside the Grotto Heaven to kill Ben Shui's 8,000 soldiers. Now, you have set up this formation here. Do you want to rely on this formation and your 5,000 people to eliminate Ben Shui and his 14,000 soldiers? The Blood Hell Marshal's tone was filled with mockery and ridicule. After he finished speaking, the many god kings and generals beside him laughed loudly and mercilessly mocked Patriarch Pine Crane. The 14,000 soldiers also came back to their senses. The worry and confusion in their hearts disappeared, and they regained their confidence. In their minds, since the marshal dared to say this, he definitely had the confidence to destroy this formation. They had almost 3 times the number of their opponents. They could win with their eyes closed. What was there to be afraid of? Chapter 42-33. Patriarch Pine Crane was not angry at all when faced with the mockery of Marshal Blood Prison and the other god kings and generals. The other 4 patriarchs were also very calm. There was an inexplicable smile at the corner of their mouths. They appeared to be very confident. The 5,000 disciples and captives were also very calm. They did not show any fear. However, when the 2,000 captives saw the blood prison marshal, the god kings, and the generals, they felt ashamed. Marshal Blood Prison stared at the 5 patriarchs. He could not help but frown when he saw their reactions. Where did their confidence and courage come from? They dared to be so calm and even confident when facing Ben Shui. Could it be that other than these 5 forces, they have an even more powerful backer? This thought flashed through Marshal Blood Prison's mind. He could not help but think of Kenshin. At this moment, the 2 generals beside him suddenly exclaimed. They pointed at the captives mixed in with the Pine Crane disciples and shouted, "Everyone, look! Aren't those our people? Didn't they say that the 4 Samsara divine generals and 8,000 soldiers were killed by the Pine Crane clan without leaving a single survivor? Look, many of those Pine Crane clansmen are our soldiers." The 2 generals' exclamations attracted everyone's attention. Over 20 God King experts looked in the direction of the voice. Even the Blood Prison marshal frowned and cast a cold gaze. As expected. Among the 5,000 Pine Crane disciples, at least 2,000 of them used to be soldiers under Marshal Blood Prison. The 2,000 soldiers were stared at by Marshal Blood Prison and the other generals. They also had to endure the disdainful gazes of more than 10,000 soldiers. They immediately felt ashamed. Due to the Heavenly Tao Oath, they could not change sides and return to Marshal Blood Prison's camp. However, their moral standards and loyalty made them feel very awkward. They wished they could find a hole to hide in. Marshal Blood Prison's face darkened. His gaze turned gloomy and cold. However, he did not get angry at the 2,000 captives. Instead, he stared at Patriarch Pine Crane and shouted angrily, "Pine Crane, you are truly audacious. You deserve to die. You left 2,000 captives and forced them to join the battle. You pointed your sword at your former brothers and friends. You are truly despicable and shameless. This is also an insult to Ben Shui. You are finished. If Ben Shui doesn't tear you to shreds today, he won't be able to answer to his soldiers." The Blood Prison marshal was a powerhouse of such status and realm. In addition, he had a calm personality. Of course, he would not casually swear an oath in public. However, the weight of his words, as well as the hatred he revealed, still made people shudder. Patriarch Pine Crane did not panic at all. After all, he had Kenshin standing behind him. His heart was very calm. He smiled calmly and said to Marshal Blood Prison, "Marshal Blood Prison, who is more despicable and shameless? Everyone knows. Why do you have to twist words and force logic? If it weren't for Commander Mingi being so overbearing and wanting to kill my clan, why would we have to meet on the battlefield? Moreover, since we set up this grand formation to fight you here, we never thought of letting you leave alive. The Blood Prison Marshal sneered with an extremely contemptuous expression. He didn't even bother to refute Patriarch Song He. The God Kings and generals around him laughed aloud without any restraint. They all mocked the Patriarch. Ha ha ha. Song Hetao, you must have lost your mind, right? With just these few people, we'll kill you all in less than an hour. You won't be able to last more than 10 rounds under the Marshal's sword. Song Hetao, if you still have some self-awareness, quickly admit defeat and kneel down to beg for mercy. That's right. Song Hetao, if you kneel down and beg for mercy now, the Marshal can still give you a dignified death. Once the battle starts, you can only be reduced to ashes. There won't even be a corpse left. The Blood Prison Marshal no longer cared about Patriarch Song He. The anger and killing intent in his heart had accumulated to the peak. He looked at the captives in the crowd and said in a dignified tone, although you were forced to surrender and fight for the Pine Crane clan in order to survive, Ben Shuai won't punish you. Perhaps the despicable and shameless Song Hetao used some method to control you. Ben Shuai doesn't ask you to change sides. Now, you only need to retreat to the edge of the grand formation and watch with folded arms. Ben Shuai wants you to see with your own eyes how tragic the fate of the traitors of the Pine Crane clan will be. When the 2,000 captives heard this, they were inexplicably moved. Many soldiers subconsciously bowed to the Blood Prison Marshal to express their gratitude. However, when they thought of the terrifying heavenly oath, they abruptly extinguished those thoughts. Under the gaze of the crowd, they were very embarrassed. They hesitated and remained silent, not moving for a long time. Seeing the captives' reaction, the Blood Prison Marshal was completely enraged. His face darkened as he angrily rebuked, "A group of cowardly bastards. Have your loyalty and courage been eaten by dogs? Since you disobeyed Ben Shuai's order and wanted to kill your former comrades, then Ben Shuai will not show mercy and will kill all of you. Consider it a military punishment." At this point, the Blood Prison Marshal's patience was exhausted. He immediately waved his hand and gave the order to attack. Kill! Following the Blood Prison Marshal's order, the 14,000 soldiers roared angrily, their bodies bursting with murderous intent. Even though they were suppressed by invisible divine power and their strength was greatly weakened, their morale was still high. However, their morale was high. They waved their weapons stubbornly and launched a counterattack at the 5,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives around them. Patriarch Pine Crane did not waste any more time. He waved his sword and gave the order to attack. The 3,000 Pine Crane disciples and 2,000 captives immediately formed a battle formation and jointly cast spells to launch an attack. Patriarch Pine Crane and the other patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans were not idle either. They all took the lead and joined the battle, casting spells to attack. On the Blood Prison Marshal's side, in addition to the 14,000 soldiers, more than 20 god kings and generals also joined the battle. Even the 9 divine warships released divine power beams and cannons to launch a fierce attack. Only the Blood Prison Marshal stopped in the sky and looked down at the battlefield as if everything was under his control. In the blink of an eye, the battle royale of over 19,000 people was about to begin. Both sides released divine power shadows that blotted out the sky and were about to engage in the most intense collision. The result of the battle between the two sides would definitely be the 5 ancient clans at a disadvantage and suffer heavy casualties. But at this moment, the 5-colored light barrier suddenly released tens of thousands of 5-colored sword lights and thousands of lightning beams that blasted toward the army under the Blood Prison Marshal. 40,000 5-colored sword lights and 6,000 lightning beams were even more shocking and dazzling than the divine power shadows released by both sides. An invisible pressure that could destroy heaven and earth instantly enveloped the soldiers under the Blood Prison Marshal. Everyone was filled with fear as they felt the aura of death. The patriarchs and elders of the 5 ancient clans were immediately overjoyed and excited. They knew that Kenshin had finally made his move. Translator, Zenobie's editor, Zenobie's. Chapter 42-34. When the people of the 5 clans learned that Kenshin had taken action, they were excited and filled with joy and anticipation. As for Martial Blood Prison and the God Kings and generals under him, their expressions changed drastically. Deep worry and anxiety appeared in their eyes. As God King experts, they obviously knew the power of the sword flashes and lightning pillars. It was not something that Divine Lord Realm soldiers could withstand. If they did not stop it or try to protect the soldiers, thousands of soldiers would be killed in the next moment. At this critical moment, Martial Blood Prison could no longer watch the battle calmly. He decisively waved his palms, producing a sky full of blood-red palm shadows that attacked the sword flashes and lightning pillars. Over 20 God Kings and generals also attacked with all their strength to block the sword flashes and lightning pillars. Bam! 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 The divine art shadows that blotted out the sky clashed with the sword flashes and lightning pillars, producing deafening booms as endless divine light shards were sent flying. The array that spanned 20,000 kilometers was completely filled with divine light shards. It was chaotic, making it impossible to see anything clearly. However, it was still possible to hear many God Kings and generals being injured as they let out painful groans and screams. Furthermore, Martial Blood Prison and the God Kings and generals were unable to protect the soldiers under them even when they worked together. They only managed to intercept a small portion of the sword flashes and lightning pillars. Most of the sword flashes and lightning pillars still managed to destroy the divine arts cast by the soldiers and drown them out. With a loud rumble, at least 3,000 soldiers were torn to shreds by the sword flashes and blasted to smithereens by the lightning pillars. After a few seconds of turmoil, the earth-shaking booms gradually came to a stop. Before the array could regain its clarity, before the billions of divine light shards dissipated, the two sides began a second round of battle. And at this moment, Ji Tianqing's 5,000 soldiers did not suffer any casualties, but Martial Blood Prison's 14,000 soldiers only had 11,000 left. In the first clash, Martial Blood Prison had suffered heavy losses. This was an extremely dangerous signal. Not only did it fill the 11,000 soldiers with fear, it also worried Martial Blood Prison and the God Kings and generals. They realized that the array that spanned 20,000 kilometers was just too terrifying. It had completely exceeded their expectations. It was no wonder Song Hetao and the patriarchs of the other 4 clans were so confident and calm. However, no one could understand. Even if the 5 clans worked together, they could not set up such a powerful array. Could it be that there was someone else who set up the array? This thought circled around Martial Blood Prison's mind and it became more and more intense. The guess in his heart became firmer as he became more and more worried and fearful. The battle was still going on. Ji Tianqing remained invisible while controlling the formation to release divine power and various divine arts to attack the Blood Hell Marshal's army. At the same time, he monitored all the activity on the battlefield to provide assistance at any time. The Blood Prison Marshal and the many God Kings and generals worked together to attack the God King experts of the 5 clans. The 5 clans' God Kings with their numbers were forced to retreat. If it wasn't for Ji Tianqing secretly helping them and stopping the Blood Prison Marshal and the other generals, they wouldn't have been able to hold on. Ji Tianqing's 3,000 Pine Crane disciples and 2,000 captives also unleashed their full combat strength as they attacked the enemy with all their might. The 11,000 soldiers were already suppressed by the array's power and could not unleash much combat strength. They were also attacked by the array and 5,000 soldiers. They suffered greatly as their casualties rapidly increased. At such a dangerous moment, they hoped that Martial Blood Prison and the God Kings could help and protect them. Unfortunately, Martial Blood Prison, the God Kings, and the generals could barely fend for themselves. How could they have the strength to care about them? Under such circumstances, it was obvious what the outcome of the battle would be. The defeat of Martial Blood Prison's side was only a matter of time. Many people were aware of this, but the reactions of both sides were different. Ji Tianqing's soldiers became braver as they fought. Their morale soared and they were in high spirits. This was especially so for the four clans' patriarchs and elders. This was the first time they were fighting alongside Kenshin. In the past, they had only heard of how powerful Kenshin was and how he was famous and awe-inspiring. Now that they had seen Kenshin's methods with their own eyes, they knew what it meant to be able to defeat 1,000,000 soldiers alone. They watched as Kenshin secretly attacked and casually cast spells. He beat up Martial Blood Prison and the God Kings until the sky was spinning and the earth was spinning and they were riddled with injuries. The four patriarchs were secretly excited and glad. They thought that if the situation continued to develop, it would not be long before Kenshin could take over Yudu and unify the entire Reincarnation Island. On the other side, the soldiers under Martial Blood Prison were suffering severe casualties as their numbers decreased sharply. The soldiers' morale continued to decline, and their fighting spirit became weaker and weaker. There were even many soldiers who kept retreating. It was a pity that the surrounding 20,000 miles were sealed by the array. No matter where they retreated, they could not escape the suppression of the array. They could not escape death in the end. Martial Blood Prison and the 20-odd God Kings and generals were burning with worry. They watched as the soldiers under their command dwindled, but they were anxious and helpless. Half an hour passed. The intense battle lasted for so long before it finally eased up. Out of the 5,000 soldiers under Ji Tianqing, more than 300 were sacrificed, and more than 400 were severely injured. Those who were severely injured retreated from the array and went far away to recuperate. The 4,200 people who were still participating in the battle were also exhausted. Their divine power was severely depleted. However, the soldiers under Martial Blood Prison ended up in an even more miserable state. At this time, the number of soldiers in the army had been reduced to about 6,000. In the past hour, 5,000 soldiers had been killed. The grassland within 20,000 miles had long been reduced to ruins. Corpses and divine weapon fragments could be seen everywhere. In addition, 6 of the 9 divine warships had been destroyed. The remaining 3 were also riddled with injuries and were not far from collapsing. Martial Blood Prison was also riddled with injuries from Ji Tianqing's attacks. He was covered in blood and looked very wretched. If it were anyone else, they would have thought that the power of the array had injured him to this extent. However, he knew that this was definitely not the doing of the array. There was a strong practitioner secretly casting spells to deal with him. Although Martial Blood Prison was still not completely sure that the strong practitioner hiding in the dark was Kenshin. What he was certain of was that the strong practitioner was most likely a peak God King. This conclusion made his heart palpitate and anxious. Looking at the situation on the battlefield, he knew that this battle was bound to be lost. Hence, he no longer harbored any thoughts of getting lucky and decisively gave the order to break out. Of course, breaking out was also particular about method and strategy. The 6,000 soldiers continued to fight a bloody battle. He personally led more than a dozen God Kings to crack the array first. Only by cracking open a gap in the array would they have a chance to escape. The moment Martial Blood Prison gave the order, those dozen God Kings carried out the order without hesitation, following him to crack the array. Because those dozen God Kings who were severely injured had long wanted to retreat. However, without Martial Blood Prison giving the order, they did not dare to retreat without permission. Chapter 42-35. Although the Blood Hell Marshal's every step was slow and steady, and his plans were very meticulous. Unfortunately, Ji Tianqing was the overlord of this grand formation that covered an area of 20,000 kilometers. He was constantly monitoring everything that happened in the array. The blood hell marshal and the dozen godly kings' actions naturally could not escape his sharp eyes. Without waiting for the blood hell marshal and the dozen godly kings to observe the structure of the array, he controlled the array to release terrifying divine power and destructive divine art shadows. Bam! 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 Rumble! A series of dull explosions erupted as dazzling divine light burst out. The dozen godly kings were blown off their feet as blood spurted out of their orifices. The blood hell marshal was also blown back, and he looked even more miserable. Such an outcome made the blood hell marshal even more certain that the expert who was hiding in the dark was definitely a peak godly king. The dozen godly kings also reacted. After seeing the clues, they revealed shocked and worried expressions. Damn it! This is definitely not the array's automatic counterattack. The array is an inanimate object. How can it be like it has eyes? There must be an expert controlling the array and watching our movements at all times. I can be sure that it's not Songhatao, nor the patriarchs of the 4 clans, apart from the 5 of them, who else can control the array. In other words, there's an expert controlling the array in the dark and has never shown himself. Then who could it be? When everyone guessed this possibility, the same thought involuntarily flashed through their minds. Could it be Kenshin? Once they thought that this array was set up by Kenshin and that Kenshin was very likely to be in the array, hiding in the dark and staring at them with a cold smile and murderous intent, everyone shuddered. After such a shock, everyone's morale dropped even further. They were already trembling with fear and worry. Next, the situation returned to how it was before. The soldiers under the blood hell marshal retreated in defeat as the number of casualties continued to increase. The blood hell marshal and the many godly kings and generals thought of ways to attack the array, but they were unable to break through and break out of the encirclement. On the other hand, the experts of the 5 clans continued to press forward. The 4,000 pine crane disciples and captives were also slowly shrinking their encirclement. As time passed, the number of soldiers under the blood hell marshal's command dwindled. Even the divine king experts and generals were killed by Ji Tianqing one after another. Another hour later, the battle was nearing its end. Of the thousands of soldiers, only 800 were left. Their morale had completely collapsed. The 800-plus soldiers were bathed in blood, their clothes tattered, and they looked miserable to the extreme. They were only relying on their survival instincts and the last of their strength and willpower to hold on. If not for the presence of the blood prison marshal and the other generals, they would have surrendered long ago. Of course, it would be useless even if they surrendered. Both sides had already fought until now until their eyes were bloodshot. There was no way to stop at all. More than 4,000 pine crane disciples and captives surrounded them and attacked them fiercely. It didn't take long for them to be wiped out, leaving no survivors. And at this moment, the blood prison marshal and the dozen or so surviving godly kings and godly generals were in complete despair after more than 100 attempts. No matter what method they used, even if they attacked together with their full strength, they could not break through the array that spanned 20,000 kilometers. The array was formed by 3 layers of arrays. They could not even break through the first layer of the array, let alone the other 2 layers. They finally understood what it meant to be a turtle in a jar. Seeing his subordinates being killed, leaving only him and the 14 godly kings and godly generals, the blood prison marshal suddenly fell silent. The battle came to an abrupt end. The 4,400 pine crane disciples and captives were temporarily able to catch their breaths, but they did not let down their guard. They surrounded the blood prison marshal and company with weapons in hand. Patriarch Pine Crane stepped out of the crowd and looked at the blood prison marshal and company with a smile. He said with a teasing tone, "Blood prison marshal, you have lost." That's right. The blood prison marshal had suffered a crushing defeat. Defeat in this battle meant death. There was no turning back. The blood prison marshal was surprisingly calm. He did not get angry or roar. His eyes were blood-red as he stared coldly at Patriarch Pine Crane. He said with a hoarse voice, "Pine Crane, it's impossible for a trash like you to do all this. Even this great formation is impossible for the trash of your 5 clans to set up. Tell Banshui, who is your backer? Is it Kenshin? Did he come to Reincarnation Island long ago? Were the 4 godly generals of reincarnation and the 8,000 soldiers killed by him? Speak." The blood prison marshal's tone was full of resentment. His body was filled with crazy killing intent. Even the godly generals beside him shuddered. Patriarch Pine Crane was not afraid. He still had a smile on his face. However, he remained silent and did not answer rashly. He seemed to be listening to something. After a while, he smiled and said to the blood prison marshal, As expected of the marshal. You finally found a clue and guessed the answer. Unfortunately, you found out too late. Of course, that Lord is merciful and merciful. He decided to let you die knowing the reason. After that, Patriarch Pine Crane returned to the crowd. He and the other 4 clans' patriarchs and elders all bowed and made a gesture of respectfully inviting the powerhouse to come out. The blood prison marshal and the 14 godly generals and godly kings all widened their eyes. They held their breaths and stared at the night sky. They had guessed that the mastermind behind this battle was Kenshin. However, when Patriarch Pine Crane openly admitted that Kenshin was about to come out, they could not help but feel nervous. Finally, in the dark night sky, a white light suddenly flashed, and a white-robed figure appeared. He stood in the air in front of the 5 patriarchs, facing the blood prison marshal and the 14 godly generals and godly kings alone. At this moment, everyone's eyes were focused on him. What a handsome young man in a white robe. Although he was only standing in the night sky with an indifferent expression, his body exuded a domineering aura that could suppress the world. Not only the 5 clans, but even the blood prison marshal and the 14 godly generals and godly kings were intimidated by his aura and felt a strong sense of reverence in their hearts. At this moment, the blood prison marshal suddenly felt a sense of oppression as if he was facing the god of the underworld. He vaguely felt that Kenshin's strength was not far from the god of the underworlds. This was an extremely important and terrifying piece of news. Kenshin. It really is Kenshin. Ha ha ha. Kenshin really came to the Reincarnation Island. No wonder he didn't show his face before. He wanted to catch all the blood prison marshals in one fell swoop. I'm so excited. I never thought that I would be able to see Lord Kenshin in my lifetime. At this moment, more than 2,000 Pine Crane disciples came back to their senses and cheered excitedly. Chapter 42-36. Logically speaking, those Pine Crane disciples were all soldiers under the Sword God's command. They shouldn't be so excited to see Kenshin appear. However, Kenshin had never shown his face in public since he came to Reincarnation Island. The only people who had seen his true face were the 5 clan leaders and elders, as well as the captives. However, they had been bound by the heavenly oath and had kept this a secret. The disciples of the Pine Crane race had been guessing whether the mysterious expert who was secretly helping the Pine Crane race was the Sword God. However, they had only guessed and hadn't been able to confirm it. Now that they saw Kenshin appear with their own eyes and confirmed their guesses, how could they not be overjoyed and excited? The blood prison marshal, the 14 divine generals, and divine kings all paled. Their eyes flashed with deep reverence and fear. Their guesses had finally been confirmed. The last bit of hope in their hearts had been completely extinguished. Since the mastermind really was Kenshin, they had no more hope. Next, they shouldn't think about escaping or breaking out of the encirclement. They should think about how to die a quick and dignified death. That was the most important thing. Of course, this was what some divine generals and divine kings thought. The blood prison marshal thought more deeply. His mood was the heaviest and most sorrowful. He stared at Ji Tianqing and sneered bitterly. I didn't expect the reincarnated Kenshin to be even stronger than before. He even learned how to use schemes and schemes. Kenshin, weren't you arrogant and indifferent in the past and disdained to use schemes? How did you become the person you used to hate the most? An expert who had a clear personality and stuck to his principles and style wasn't scary. That was because it was easy for the enemy to see through him and find his weak points. However, an expert who was cunning and knew how to use schemes was very difficult to deal with and even terrifying. The Blood Prison Marshal knew that he was going to die today. He was deeply worried for Commander Styx and Reincarnation Island. When he mocked Ji Tianqing, he had already made up his mind. Even if he died here, he would send the news of Kenshin's appearance to Commander Styx. Only by telling Commander Mingi to be on guard as soon as possible could they prevent the same mistakes from happening again. Ji Tianqing looked at the Blood Prison Marshal with an indifferent expression and said, as long as I can kill the 5 great god emperors, take revenge, and return peace to the god realm, I am willing to try any kind of conspiracy or overt scheme. The process is not important, as long as the goal is achieved. Humph, quibble. The Blood Hell Marshal snorted disdainfully. However, he secretly ordered the 14 god generals and god kings to mock Ji Tianqing and attract his attention. The god generals and god kings guessed the Blood Prison Marshal's intentions and began to mock and ridicule Ji Tianqing. Everyone chimed in one after another without stopping. Ji Tianqing just looked at them indifferently. He didn't even have the intention to fight back. Blood Hell Marshal took this opportunity to retreat into the crowd. He quietly took out a special communication jade slip and prepared to send a message to Commander Styx. The purple jade slip he took out was very precious. It would only be used under special circumstances to send a top-secret message. Moreover, this jade slip would definitely pass through the Superior King Great Array and reach Commander Styx. Even a peak god king wouldn't be able to stop it. However, Ji Tianqing had been monitoring the entire scene. He stared at the Blood Hell Marshal's every move. He had already expected that the Blood Hell Marshal would send a message to Commander Styx. The moment the Blood Hell Marshal took out the jade slip, he had already controlled the array to release an invisible suppressive force to imprison the Blood Hell Marshal's movements. At the same time, he waved his palms and shot out a few dazzling sword lights that attacked the Blood Hell Marshal. Since I have shown myself, I won't let you live. More so, I won't let you spread the news. Blood Prison Marshal, just give up. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. The sharp sword lights instantly enveloped the Blood Hell Marshal's figure. The formless heaven-reaching sword intent actually shattered the space around him, turning it into a pitch-black void. The dozen god generals and god kings were only a few hundred feet away from him, but they were no longer in the same space. The Blood Hell Marshal's expression changed drastically. He subconsciously unleashed all his strength and condensed a protective divine light to block the sword lights. At the same time, he entered information into the jade slip as fast as he could. Time was too tight. He only had time to say Kenshin is here before he was struck by the sword lights. Bam! 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 Amidst the deafening noise, the Blood Hell Marshal's protective divine light collapsed on the spot. Countless divine light fragments splattered out. Immediately after, his divine body was also minced into several pieces by the sword lights. Blood splattered everywhere. The special jade slip in his hand was also shattered into pieces by the sword light and scattered in the void. Ji Tianqing only used one move to destroy the Blood Hell Marshal's jade slip and his divine body. The Blood Hell Marshal's remaining godhead floated in the shattered void. The 14 divine generals and divine kings widened their eyes at this sight. They were filled with extreme fright. They never expected Kenshin to be so powerful. The extremely noble and powerful Blood Hell Marshal in their eyes was actually so weak that he was insta-killed by Kenshin. On the other side, the disciples of the 5 clans cheered excitedly. They became even more excited and admired Kenshin even more. Whoosh! Ji Tianqing shot out another sword light. It passed through the pitch-black void rift and accurately hit the Blood Hell Marshal's godhead. Crack! With a crisp explosion, the Blood Hell Marshal's godhead exploded into more than a dozen fragments. Ji Tianqing waved his hand again and shot out a divine light. He captured the Blood Hell Marshal's godhead fragments and successfully kept them. Only then did the 14 god generals and god kings react. Everyone let out anxious exclamations and turned to flee as fast as they could. This was purely an instinctive reaction. Even though they knew that they could not escape the suppression of the array, they still wanted to get as far away from Ji Tianqing as possible. Of course, these were all futile actions. Ji Tianqing waved his hand again and shot out a few sword lights and dragon elephant divine fist at the few god generals. The patriarchs and elders of the 5 clans also let out battle cries and cast spells to surround and attack. Bam! 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 Rumble! Dazzling divine arts lit up again. All kinds of divine powers and ultimate skills filled the night sky again. The 14 godly generals and godly kings did not even have a chance to resist. Very soon, they were surrounded and killed. Even though there were several god kings who shouted loudly in fear that they would surrender. Unfortunately, their shouts were drowned out by the battle cries. As soon as they shouted their surrender, Ji Tianqing didn't even have the chance to say anything before they were killed. The battle had come to an end just like that. The Blood Hell Marshal's side was almost completely wiped out. Chapter 42-37. The 18,000 troops brought by the Blood Prison Marshal, as well as the 4,000 cannon fodders that were temporarily gathered, had basically all died in ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. However, there were still 800 seriously injured cannon fodders who did not enter ancient Pine Grotto Heaven at all and had long since returned to their respective regions. They did not know the result of the battle, nor did they know what had happened in the Grotto Heaven, so they would not leak any information about Kenshin. After the battle ended, the 4,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives all let out excited cheers. Especially the Pine Crane disciples, they let out a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders, celebrating their victory in high spirits. The patriarchs and elders of the 5 clans were also excited, their blood boiling as they shouted and cheered loudly. However, Ji Tianqing let everyone cheer for a few breaths of time before raising his hand to interrupt them. The formation immediately quieted down as everyone's eyes gathered on him, waiting for him to give the order. Ji Tianqing ordered in a dignified tone, "The battle is over. We have won a great victory and almost wiped out the invaders. The Blood Prison Marshal was killed here, which is equivalent to cutting off Commander Styx's arms. It is a great blow to him. However, the army that the Blood Prison Marshal brought is not limited to this. Outside the Grotto Heaven, there are several hundred scouts scattered around, monitoring the situation within a radius of 100,000 kilometers. Patriarch Pine Crane, immediately take 2,000 soldiers to chase down those several hundred scouts and do your best to kill them. In addition, arrange for several elders and 1,000 disciples to stay behind and clean up the battlefield. Everyone else, return to recuperate and heal your injuries as soon as possible." After the battle, there were 2 things that needed to be done as soon as possible. The first was to chase down the remaining scouts and spies, and the second was to clean up the battlefield to make sure that no one had escaped or played dead to avoid disaster. After giving these orders, Ji Tianqing took the patriarchs and elders of the 4 clans and turned to fly into the depths of the Grotto Heaven. Patriarch Pine Crane and several elders busied themselves and began to assign manpower. Soon, Patriarch Pine Crane took 2,000 soldiers and rushed out of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven to kill the assassins of the Hidden Death Corps. The 4 elders and 1,000 disciples stayed behind to clean up the battlefield and count the spoils of war. Everything was proceeding in an orderly manner. In the depths of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, in the Pine Crane Divine Palace, Ji Tianqing sat on the throne at the head of the table, while the patriarchs and elders of the four ancient clans stood respectfully in the hall. A few days ago, when they made the oath to the Tao of the heavens, they were still somewhat resentful and unwilling. However, after this battle, they had witnessed Kenshin's strength and methods, and they were completely convinced and impressed. They revered Kenshin from the bottom of their hearts. They felt fortunate and proud to be able to take the oath of surrender and become Kenshin's soldiers. The Blood Hell Marshal and his army of 22,000 were easily killed by the Kenshin. In that case, how long could Commander Mingi last in Yudu? Everyone knew that the Samsara Island would change hands in a month or two at the latest. And these 5 clans were the greatest contributors. At this moment, the patriarchs of the 4 ancient clans were only thinking about how to become Kenshin's right-hand men from Kenshin's subordinates. This required time, and even more so, they needed to go through great battles one after another, and achieve even more merit points. The hall was very quiet, and both sides were silent. Seeing that Ji Tianqing didn't speak, the 4 patriarchs secretly looked at each other and communicated with their eyes. Thus, the hidden dragon patriarch took 2 steps forward and bowed to Ji Tianqing, saying respectfully, "Lord Kenshin, we won the battle with fewer troops and annihilated the army led by the Blood Hell Marshal. It was all thanks to your divine strategy and supreme divine arts. It's a pity that for the sake of confidentiality, we can't reveal your whereabouts and news for the time being. However, we don't dare to be greedy for this merit, nor do we dare to be praised by the people of Samsara Island. We just want to gather the disciples of our clans as soon as possible and follow Lord Kenshin's orders to go to the battlefield to kill the enemy and achieve more merits." The hidden dragon patriarch, who usually looked reckless, was actually very careful and even said such words in a roundabout way. Ji Tianqing laughed secretly in his heart. However, everyone knew what the hidden dragon patriarch wanted to express. That was, the 4 ancient clans had completely submitted to Kenshin. Seeing that the Pine Crane clan had achieved great merits and made great sacrifices, they weren't willing to be defeated by the Pine Crane clan. Therefore, they wanted to immediately gather the disciples of their clans and listen to Kenshin's orders to go to the battlefield to kill the enemy and achieve more merits. Ji Tianqing was naturally happy that the 4 ancient clans had such thoughts and determination. In this way, the 5 ancient clans would all submit, and the rebel alliance would be established. Taking down the Samsara Island would be just around the corner. He put on an act of encouraging the 4 patriarchs, and then officially issued an order for the 4 ancient clans to gather their people and quickly gather at Ancient Pine Paradise. Hearing this order, the 4 patriarchs were excited but also a little disappointed. Kenshin wanted them to gather the disciples of their clans at Ancient Pine Paradise. Didn't this mean that Kenshin wanted to make Ancient Pine Paradise their headquarters? According to this development, when Kenshin unified the entire Samsara Island in the future, the Pine Crane clan would definitely be the biggest winner. Thinking of this, the 4 patriarchs were filled with worry and anxiety. However, Kenshin had made a decision, and they couldn't change it or refute it. They could only follow the order. The 4 patriarchs and elders bowed to Ji Tianqing and took their leave. Next, they had to rush back to their respective abodes and personally select the elite disciples, then rush back to Ancient Pine Paradise to gather. If it was on the boundless heaven continent, the clans would be far away, and it would take at least a month to go back and forth. However, the Samsara Island was very small, and it would take at most half a month to complete. The patriarchs and elders of the 4 clans left, and Ji Tianqing returned to his residence to rest. 4 hours later, the 4 elders came to report to him with a huge amount of spoils. Reporting to Lord Kenshin, the battlefield has been cleaned up. The inside of the formation has been cleaned up, and the ruins have been filled in. All the spatial rings, divine armors, and godhead fragments are here. Please take a look. The 4 elders each took out 2 interspatial rings and presented them to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing's consciousness entered the rings and saw nearly 20,000 spatial rings, as well as countless weapons, armors, fragments, and so on. As for the Godhead fragments of the God King powerhouses, they were very valuable spoils of war, so of course they were stored separately. Ji Tianqing took away the Godhead fragments of the Godheads, as well as the spatial rings of the Blood Prison Marshal and several generals. The rest of the spoils were left in the hands of the 4 elders. He ordered, "Next, the task of counting these spoils of war will be left to you. Finish it as soon as possible." The 4 elders hurriedly complied, bowing and retreating. Chapter 42-38. Not long after the 4 elders left, Chief Song He also returned and reported the situation to Ji Tianqing. He looked travel-worn and was in a sorry state. The bloodstains on his body had yet to dry. When he reported the situation to Ji Tianqing, he also had an awkward expression. Reporting to Lord Kenshin, "I found out that there are close to 500 scouts and spies within a radius of 100,000 miles outside the Grotto Heaven. Even though my subordinates and 2,000 disciples tried our best to capture and kill those scouts and spies, they were simply too alert. When they saw that the situation wasn't good, they scattered and escaped. In the end, my subordinates and disciples only killed over 200 and captured over 30. The remaining 200 or so scouts and informants all scattered and fled. However, I've already sent the disciples who are best at tracking to follow 2 batches of people." No wonder Chief Song He felt awkward and didn't have the face to face Ji Tianqing. From what he said, if Ji Tianqing insisted on capturing the escaping assassins of the Hidden Death Squad, he would also lead his troops to chase after them. However, all of this was within Ji Tianqing's expectations. Ji Tianqing didn't blame him and just waved his hand. Those scouts and spies should be the elite assassins of the Hidden Death Squad under Commander Mingi. They don't participate in head-on battles and are best at hiding, assassinating, and gathering information. Unless I make a move personally, none of you will be able to catch all of them in one fell swoop. Alright, you don't have to blame yourself. Quickly arrange for the disciples to rest and heal their injuries. The captured assassins have to be guarded strictly and don't let them commit suicide. When you're done with the affairs of the clan, arrange for people to interrogate those assassins and see if you can get any useful information." Chief Song He was still worried and hesitated for a moment before asking, "But, Lord Kenshin, those assassins of the Hidden Death Squad might leak the information if they escape back to Yudu." Ji Tianqing said with an indifferent expression, "Marshal Blood Prison was killed and the army of 18,000 was wiped out. This news was supposed to be released so that the entire Reincarnation Island would know. Other than that, what information could those assassins of the Hidden Death Squad leak? They did not enter the ancient Pine Paradise, nor did they enter the Great Array, so they did not see me." Seeing that Ji Tianqing did not mind this matter and that what he said made sense, Patriarch Song He felt relieved and relaxed. He bowed to Ji Tianqing, then took his leave. Next, he not only had to arrange for the injured soldiers to go back and treat their wounds, but he also had to send people to watch over the captives and interrogate them with torture. Most importantly, ancient Pine Paradise's great defensive array had been blasted open by the Blood Hell Marshal's army. It had to be repaired as soon as possible. In order to repair the formation, Patriarch Song He had to do it himself. Many elders, deacons, and disciples had to work together. In everyone's opinion, the Kenshin side had obtained a complete victory in this battle, wiping out the Blood Hell Marshal's army. As the main force, the Pine Crane race naturally achieved the greatest merit and obtained the greatest honor. However, in reality, the Pine Crane race had also paid an enormous price for this. Of the 4,000 soldiers who survived, more than 1,400 were captives who had surrendered. Only about 2,800 were disciples of the Pine Crane tribe. In other words, the Pine Crane race had already lost 1,200 disciples in the previous 2 battles. These 2 battles were only the beginning of the Rebel Alliance's conquest of Reincarnation Island. There would definitely be many more battles in the next few months. Patriarch Song he did not know how many more Pine Crane disciples would have to be sacrificed. However, since he had made the choice to follow the Kenshin against the Styx Marshal and the Blood Hell Marshal, no matter how great the price he had to pay or how many disciples he had to sacrifice, he would walk down this path unswervingly. A day later, ancient Pine Paradise returned to peace. The 4 elders in charge of counting the spoils of war finally completed their task with the help of dozens of disciples. Cultivation resources worth hundreds of trillion were placed in dozens of spatial rings and presented to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing temporarily accepted these spoils of war, but he had no intention of using them. He planned to keep these spoils of war and distribute them to the 5 clans according to their merits after the battle. At this time, the Pine Crane disciples and the captives who were more seriously injured entered a state of healing. Patriarch Song he did not have time to heal his injuries. He quickly gathered a few elders and 10 attendants who were less seriously injured. He led thousands of disciples and began to repair the defense formation of the paradise. In addition, there were 2 elders and 8 attendants who were in charge of guarding and interrogating the dozens of captured assassins of the Hidden Death Group. The news that the Blood Prison Marshal had been beheaded, and the 18,000 soldiers and 4,000 soldiers that had been temporarily gathered had all been killed in the ancient Pine Paradise had also been released by the 5 clans. Everything was proceeding in an orderly manner. There was nothing for Ji Tianqing to worry about. He stayed in a quiet house and meditated for an entire day. Seeing that Patriarch Song he had taken care of all the affairs, he entered the Jyotian 10 Absolutes Pagoda at ease and went to the distorted space to cultivate. He first checked the Blood Hell Marshal's spatial ring and sorted out the cultivation resources and wealth inside. Next, he spent a few days refining the fragments of the Blood Hell Marshal's godhead and absorbing his memories. Speaking of which, the 2 Pine Crane elders had interrogated the dozens of assassins of the Hidden Death Group through torture. He had obtained more secrets from refining the fragments of the Blood Hell Marshal's godhead. As one of the people in power on Reincarnation Island, the Blood Hell Marshal knew it like the back of his hand. After Ji Tianqing refined his memories, not only did he obtain a lot of confidential information, but all the doubts he had before had also completely disappeared. Even the plan that Commander Mingi and the Blood Hell Marshal had agreed on, the military strength, and the situation of the defenses in Yudu were all clear to Ji Tianqing. After all, Commander Mingi was in charge of Yudu and was mainly in charge of commanding. As for the deployment of military strength, the Blood Hell Marshal was always in charge. In this way, Ji Tianqing knew which parts of Yudu's defenses were strong, which parts were weak, and where there were ambushes. Other than that, he also knew some secrets about the god of the underworld through the Blood Hell Marshal's memories. Of course, the Blood Hell Marshal was a valiant general that the god of the underworld trusted and thought highly of, which was why he was allowed to guard Reincarnation Island. However, the Blood Hell Marshal knew very little about the enigma of the grey fog in the outer realm. Even in the past 1,000 years, the Blood Hell Marshal had been curious about those secrets and had also asked the god of the underworld. However, the god of the underworld only gave a simple explanation and emphasized the importance of the mystery of the grey fog. He didn't reveal the real secrets. In comparison, the Blood Hell Marshal's understanding of the mystery of the grey fog was actually less than that of Ji Tianqing. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 4239. Although he didn't get the secret of the grey fog from the Blood Hell Marshal's soul memory. But Ji Tianqing wasn't disappointed. Anyway, he had investigated for so long and roughly knew what was going on with the grey fog. As for the specific situation, he would naturally go to the depths of the void in the future and investigate it himself. The most important thing now was to conquer the Reincarnation Island and control the entire God realm. At the same time, more than 200 assassins of the Hidden Death Group who escaped the pursuit sent back the news that the Blood Hell Marshal's army was ambushed and the situation seemed to be bad. Although they didn't enter the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven and didn't know the specific situation. But they lost contact with the Blood Hell Marshal and the many god generals and were pursued by the Pine Crane clan. This was enough to prove that the Blood Hell Marshal had been defeated, and that the 18,000 soldiers were likely to have perished. In the Yuta city, Commander Mingi, many god king powerhouses, and the 18 domain lords had been patiently waiting for the news. Although everyone was very confident in the Blood Hell Marshal and believed that he would win this battle. But in everyone's heart, there was a trace of speculation about Kenshin, so they were still a little nervous. If they didn't get the exact news of the Blood Hell Marshal's victory, they couldn't really be at ease. Finally, the assassins of the Hidden Death Group sent back the news. The god generals and the leader of the Hidden Death Group who received the Jade Scroll didn't even have time to check the content of the message before sending it to Commander Mingi. Commander Mingi took the Jade Scroll with anticipation, but when he saw the content of the report in the Jade Scroll, he was stunned on the spot. Immediately, the smile on his face stiffened and gradually became cold, and his body burst out with towering anger and murderous intent. This is impossible. The Grand Marshal personally led the army, and he has always been cautious. How could he be ambushed and defeated? In a rage, Commander Mingi smashed the communication Jade Scroll with a slap. He was so angry that his face turned black and his body was trembling. The leader of the Hidden Death Group and several god generals were also dumbfounded. They all widened their eyes in horror and couldn't believe the news. Commander Dark River had smashed the transmission slip, but the transmission slip had been shattered. But more than 200 assassins of the Hidden Death Group scattered and fled, and many of them sent back messages to report the battle situation. As a result, in the next hour, the leader of the Hidden Death Group received dozens of communication Jade Scrolls. The contents of each Jade slip were roughly the same. As such, the commander of the Secret Killer Alliance, the godly generals, godly kings, and domain lords had no choice but to accept this cruel reality. For a moment, the huge conference hall was filled with a heavy and oppressive atmosphere. Everyone's heart was heavy. Commander Styx was silent for a long time. It wasn't until 2 hours later that he gradually suppressed his anger and killing intent, and his emotions calmed down. Immediately try to contact the Grand Marshal and those soldiers. We must find out the truth. Not only do we need to know the outcome of the battle, we also need to know how many of the Grand Marshal's subordinates survived. Commander Mingi gave the order in a cold and deep voice. Those god generals and domain leaders hurriedly bowed and said, "Yes, sir." At this time, everyone remained silent and respectful. No one dared to offend him. Commander Styx paused for a moment before continuing, "Even if the 5 ancient clans come out in full force, there's nothing to fear. No matter what kind of traps and ambushes they set up, it was impossible for them to defeat the Grand Marshal and his 18,000-strong army. Even if we don't want to admit it, the truth is already very clear. That damned bastard has probably already arrived at Reincarnation Island and is secretly helping the Pine Crane clan. He is the only one who can defeat the Grand Marshal." Although Commander Mingi didn't mention that expert's name, all the godly kings in the conference hall knew that he was talking about Kenshin. Since even Commander Mingi had to admit that it was very likely that Kenshin had already arrived, everyone's mood became even worse. The same thought flashed through everyone's mind. Kenshin is here. It's over. What should we do? The Grand Marshal has already been defeated. How can we stop Kenshin? Commander Mingi obviously had a headache over this problem as well, and he couldn't think of a solution. He didn't say anything else. He only watched the godly kings and ordered them to keep this a secret so as to not affect the morale of the army. Then he waved his hand, indicating for everyone to leave. The godly kings, generals, and domain lords all bowed and left the conference hall. In the next few hours, all the god kings and generals hurried to Commander Styx's study to report the situation. As a result, all 18,000 soldiers, including Marshal Blood Prison, had lost contact with them. Furthermore, the generals had also gone to the psychic hall to check. The divine soul jade tablets of the blood prison marshal and the divine generals were all shattered. The facts proved that the blood prison marshal and the few divine generals had already perished, their bodies and souls destroyed. Since the blood prison marshal and several divine generals had fallen, the 18,000 soldiers must have been killed as well. After confirming the results, Commander Styx was so angry that he almost vomited blood. His face twisted with rage. The worry and fear in the hearts of the god kings and generals grew heavier and heavier. Even though Yudu had tens of thousands of soldiers protecting it, making it impregnable, Qin Mu was still able to protect it. However, the god kings and generals still felt a chill run down their backs. They did not feel safe at all. After an entire night, the enraged Commander Styx finally calmed down. He considered a very important problem. The blood prison marshal and the divine generals were dead, but the 18,000 soldiers might not have all been killed. There would definitely be some cowards who would admit defeat and surrender to the Kenshin. Then, they would reveal the military strength of Yudu and the situation of the defenses. Therefore, the most important thing now was to adjust the military strength of Yudu and strengthen the patrols. Thus, Commander Styx pulled himself together and gathered the various divine generals and domain lords for a discussion. After 2 hours of discussion, Commander Styx adjusted the previous defense deployment and set up more large formations at all costs to increase the defense power of Yuda city. In the blink of an eye, 5 days passed. At this time, the news that the 5 clans deliberately released had already spread on Reincarnation Island. Not only the various factions, but the empires and divine kingdoms of the 18 domains also knew that the blood prison marshal had been killed and that the 18,000 soldiers had all been wiped out. Even the hundreds of millions of common people knew about this. For a time, the 5 ancient clans led by the Pine Crane clan became the center of discussion. They were the heroes in the hearts of the common people. When they first heard the news, most people were in disbelief. They did not dare to believe that the 5 ancient clans could actually kill the blood prison marshal and wipe out the army under his command. One had to know that on Reincarnation Island, Commander Styx was synonymous with hegemony. And the blood prison marshal was equivalent to being invincible. It was truly shocking that the 5 ancient clans could create such a miracle. However, the various sources of information were very reliable. They described the cause of the matter very clearly, so people had to believe it. Therefore, after the common people confirmed the news, they fell into a frenzy of joy and excitement. Book House Reading Website. Chapter 4240. Over the next few days, news of the blood prison marshal's death and the annihilation of his army of 20,000 spread throughout Reincarnation Island. In the end, everyone knew about it, and the streets and alleys were talking about it. The people cheered, excited, and felt that victory was near. It seemed that Reincarnation Island would soon regain its freedom. The empires and divine kingdoms of the 18 regions, as well as many other powers, were worried when they heard the news. They had to consider that one of the 2 rulers of Reincarnation Island had been killed, and the morale of the soldiers guarding Yudu was low. Looking at the current situation, Commander Mingi had no chance of winning, and his defeat was only a matter of time. After the 5 ancient clans took over Yudu, Reincarnation Island would definitely experience a violent upheaval. Not only would the rulers of the 18 regions change, but many other powers would also be purged. Especially the powers that had conflicts with the 5 ancient clans, they would be unable to eat or sleep in peace. Even the emperors of the empires and divine kingdoms were worried and anxious about their future. Furthermore, many divine kings felt that it was strange. How did the 5 ancient clans become so powerful? Even if they worked together, they could only gather 10,000 disciples. It was impossible for them to annihilate the blood prison marshal's army of 20,000. Furthermore, the blood prison marshal led the army himself, and more than 30 divine kings followed him. With just the god kings of the 5 ancient clans, it was impossible for them to defeat the blood hell marshal, much less wipe him out. All of this was very strange and unbelievable. Some of the smarter divine kings couldn't help but guess that the 5 ancient clans had an expert helping them. If they wanted to know how powerful that expert was, it was definitely someone stronger than the Blood Prison Marshal. At this point in time, there seemed to be only one person who had the motive and was most likely to make a move. It was that world-famous Lord Kenshin whose might shook the god world. This conjecture raised the spirits of many experts. Their hearts were stirred up, but they also felt uneasy. Soon, rumors that Kenshin had come to Reincarnation Island and that Kenshin had killed the Blood Prison Marshal began to spread on Reincarnation Island. The rumors originated from the mouths of many forces and powerhouses, but they were very popular with the people of the Reincarnation Island and caused a great sensation. Therefore, 7 or 8 days later, the news of the Blood Hell Marshal and his 20,000 troops being annihilated finally died down. However, rumors about the Kenshin caused an uproar on the Reincarnation Island again. Hundreds of millions of people cheered and celebrated once again as they discussed this news intensely. Almost everyone had heard of the Kenshin's name and legendary deeds, and more than 90% of the people were eager and looking forward to the arrival of the Kenshin. In their eyes, Kenshin was the savior of Reincarnation Island. He was their only hope. As long as Kenshin appeared on Reincarnation Island, General Mingi and his army would be defeated without a doubt. Word had spread that Kenshin had arrived on Reincarnation Island. Then, it went without saying why the 5 ancient clans were able to kill the Blood Hell Marshal and wipe out 20,000 soldiers. Therefore, this seemingly unreliable rumor was widely spread among the people, and the people were very willing to believe it. Commander Mingi, who was in charge of Yudu, had naturally heard of this news. In fact, he had long guessed this possibility. Even when he heard the news circulating outside, he didn't have much of a reaction. He still did what he had to do. On the other hand, the soldiers stationed in Yudu, the 10 or so domain lords, the clan leaders and elders of the ancient clans, and the numerous divine kings, were somewhat flustered. Although, a few months ago, everyone had predicted that Kenshin might attack Reincarnation Island in the future. However, everyone still harbored some wishful thinking and hoped that that day would come later. Now that the news of Kenshin's arrival on Reincarnation Island had spread, everyone was panicking. There was no helping it. This news was too reliable. Otherwise, there was no way to explain how the Blood Hell Marshal and his 20,000 troops were annihilated. When they thought of Kenshin's illustrious reputation and the various miracles and legends he had created, the Divine King experts and soldiers felt a chill run down their backs. Naturally, the morale of the defending army continued to decline. The entire Yudu city became anxious, and the atmosphere was very tense and oppressive. When Commander Mingi noticed this situation, he constantly reprimanded and ordered the region lords and generals to take good care of their subordinates and raise their spirits. However, the results were minimal. The tens of thousands of soldiers were still dispirited and anxious. 10 days passed. The defensive formation of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven had already been repaired by clan leader Song He, the various elders, and deacons. The disciples and captives of Pine Crane clan were all in seclusion to heal their injuries and preserve their strength, waiting for the next battle. On the other side, the patriarchs of the 4 ancient clans would report their movements to Ji Tianqing every few days. They had already returned to their respective cave abodes. They had already selected more than 2,000 disciples and were preparing to rush to ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. After about 8 days, they would gather at ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. At the same time, Nangong Nihuang, Nangong Ao, and the others also replied to Ji Tianqing and reported the progress of their mission. A few days ago, not long after the battle ended, Ji Tianqing gave them an order and assigned them a mission. Ji Tianqing's next plan was to lead an army of more than 10,000 people from the 5 ancient clans to conquer the 18 regions one by one before finally attacking Reincarnation Island. However, before that, he had to make the situation on Reincarnation Island more chaotic. At the same time, he had to put some pressure on the 18 domain lords stationed in Yudu. He asked Nangong Nihuang, Nangong Ao, Zhan Wudi, Lan Kai, and Yuchi Pe to use disguise techniques to sneak into the secret places of the various regions and use concealment and assassination methods to create chaos. If they could sneak into the domain lord's manor and assassinate some of the guards, that would be the best. In short, he had to make the various regions chaotic. The 18 domain lords stationed in Yudu would definitely be worried when they learned that their territories were in trouble. Perhaps, they would not dare to leave Yudu because of Commander Mingi's authority and orders. However, there would definitely be animosity and conflict between them and Commander Mingi. In short, Ji Tianqing gave this mission to the 5 young god kings and let them do whatever they wanted. In the past 2 days, he received replies from Nangong Ao and the others, and the results were surprisingly good. The 5 young god kings used various methods to create chaos in various regions. They even killed over a dozen generals and commanders. Nangong Ao was the boldest. He even sneaked into the domain lord's manor of a certain region and pretended to be the captain of the guards. Not only did he kill 2 generals, but he also destroyed the treasury of the domain lord's manor, causing chaos in the entire domain lord's manor. Thousands of guards who stayed behind to guard the manor attacked each other. It was very lively. In this way, several regions were in chaos. After the news spread, it quickly reached Yuda city. Chapter 42-41. The outstanding performance of the 5 young divine kings won Ji Tianqing's affirmation and praise. They enjoyed it very much and continued to wreak havoc in other regions as if they were tireless. Especially Nangong Ao, who was arrogant, bold, meticulous, and crazy. He used all kinds of ingenious ideas and methods to wreak havoc in other domain chiefs' mansions. A few days later, riots broke out in a few more regions. 2 domain chiefs' mansions had internal strife. Just like that, half of Reincarnation Island became a mess. After the news spread, the people were also talking about it or gloating. They didn't know that someone was deliberately sabotaging. They only thought that the soldiers guarding the various domain chiefs' mansions were afraid of the Kenshin's authority and had differences and conflicts with each other. After the news spread to Yuda city, several domain chiefs' mansions were very anxious. Although their families and the elite forces under them were all in Yuda city, they were still in Yuda city. But those regions were their territories, and the domain chiefs' mansions were their homes. The guards, soldiers, and servants guarding the domain chiefs' mansions were also their most reliable servants. They were not abandoned. When they heard that the backyard was on fire, and the guards and servants even attacked and fought each other, the domain chief's eyes turned red with anxiety. They sent message jade slips one after another, questioning the soldiers guarding the domain chief's mansions remotely about what had happened. However, the guards and soldiers were divided into several factions. They each had their own version of the story, doubted and attacked each other. It was a mess, and no one could explain it clearly. Even when the domain chief ordered them to reconcile and guard the domain chief's mansions, no one obeyed him. In fact, 2 of the guards and soldiers left behind to guard the domain chief's mansions had even defected. The domain chief's remote command and mediation were useless. They were so anxious that they had no choice but to go to Commander Mingi. They wanted to ask Commander Mingi to allow them to return to the domain chief's mansions and settle the internal strife in person. However, the result was no surprise that they were rejected. They were even scolded by Commander Mingi. Commander Mingi saw it clearly. He said that the 5 ancient clans deliberately sent people to cause trouble to force them to return to their respective territories. If they couldn't hold back and return to their respective domain chiefs' mansions, they would definitely be killed by the 5 ancient clans. Commander Mingi was right. This was indeed part of Ji Tianqing's plan. If any domain chief left Yudu and rushed back to his domain chief's mansions, Ji Tianqing would definitely rush over and subdue him. Commander Mingi also wanted to scare the domain chief, so he said subdue him instead of kill. As expected, those territorial lords were intimidated. Since it was more important to save their own lives, they naturally did not dare to return to the territorial lord's manor. However, they were unwilling to accept this and asked Commander Mingi, what should they do? Were they supposed to watch the guards and soldiers who stayed behind to guard the domain chief's manor fight among themselves, then betray and kill each other? If that was the case, the entire domain chief's manor would be in chaos. Wouldn't it collapse on its own? Commander Mingi did not answer the question directly. Instead, he avoided the topic and patiently tried to enlighten the domain masters. In short, what he wanted to express was that he wanted the few domain lords to guard Yuda's city with peace of mind and prioritize Yuda's city. As for their domain chief's manor and territories, they could only give up on them for the time being. After all, Yuda's city had to be protected. As long as they won, the territories of the various region lords would still be there. If Yuda's city fell and they were defeated, all 18 regions would fall. There was no chance for them to survive. The domain lords weren't fools. They quickly figured out the logic and understood Commander Mingi's intentions. Even though they felt uncomfortable, there was nothing they could do. They could only obey Commander Mingi's orders and stay in Yuda's city obediently. As for the chaos in their own territories and the domain chief's manor, they were powerless to stop it and could only let it happen. In the blink of an eye, another 10 days passed. 20 days had passed since the Blood Prison Marshal and his army of 20,000 had been wiped out. The Reincarnation Island was still bustling with noise and excitement. Hundreds of millions of people were still discussing all kinds of news. Nangong Nihuang, Nangong Ao, and the others were still running around the various domains, trying their best to cause chaos and destruction, trying to make the 18 domains fall into chaos. The patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans also brought their carefully selected elite disciples to gather at ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. The 4 patriarchs had contacted each other and discussed in private. The number of disciples that each patriarch would select was around 2,500. The total number of disciples of the 4 ancient clans was exactly 10,000. By doing this, they could show the 4 ancient clans support for the Kenshin and their determination to follow the Kenshin into battle. They could also leave thousands of clansmen behind to have enough strength to protect the grotto mansions and homes of the various clans. After all, after the 4 patriarchs left with their elite forces, the grotto mansions of the 4 ancient clans were closed one after another. The clansmen who stayed behind no longer went in and out. Relying on the defensive formation of the Grotto Heaven, they were not afraid of being invaded. Unless Commander Mingi led an army to attack, no one could break through. Early in the morning, the patriarchs and elders of the 5 ancient clans gathered in the conference hall. Ji Tianqing sat on the throne at the head of the table and listened to the reports of various intelligence. He was quite satisfied with the efficiency and determination of the 4 ancient clans. After reporting the news, the patriarchs of the 4 ancient clans all asked Ji Tianqing to go to war. They couldn't wait to participate in the battle and make a name for themselves. Therefore, Ji Tianqing said to everyone, "The time is ripe. Our military strength is sufficient, and the public opinion and reputation of the people have also reached the peak. Now is the time when our rebel alliance's reputation is at its peak. Of course, it is the best time to go to war. Patriarch Pine Crane, choose 1,000 disciples today and prepare to follow the army." Since the 4 ancient clans had sent out 2,500 people, the Pine Crane race naturally had to send out the same number of people. However, there were still about 1,500 captives who had pledged loyalty to Ji Tianqing. After recuperating, they had recovered more than half of their combat strength. Therefore, the Pine Crane race only needed to send out 1,000 disciples. Patriarch Pine Crane also understood that this was the Kenshin taking care of the Pine Crane race. He was very grateful and hurriedly bowed to accept the order. Then, Ji Tianqing said to everyone, "The number of soldiers that can be mobilized under our alliance will reach 12,500 people. It is more than enough to conquer the various domains. After all, the domain lords and elite forces of the 18 domains have already gathered in Yuta City. Therefore, I have decided to split into 2 groups and conquer the 18 domains as quickly as possible. Clear out all the domain lord manors, disband the forces under the domain lords, and seal the 18 domain lord manors. Considering that the 18 domain lords were in Yuta City and the various domain lord manors were leaderless and could not be conquered, Ji Tianqing gave this order. However, the patriarchs were all tempted. Someone could not help but suggest, Lord Kenshin, the 18 domain lords will die sooner or later. Why don't we conquer the various domains, occupy the domain lord manors, and choose a new domain lord? Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 42-42. Everyone was well aware of the intentions of those few patriarchs. They wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to divide the 18 districts of the Reincarnation Island and take control of them. After all, there were only 5 of them under the command of the Kenshin. The new domain lord would definitely be chosen from among them. Other than this, there was no better choice. The chiefs were looking forward to it, thinking that they would get what they wanted. Unexpectedly, Ji Tianqing decisively rejected this proposal. There are still tens of thousands of soldiers guarding the Yuta city. We only have 12,500 people, which is already pitifully small. If we occupy the 18 district masters' manors, we will definitely spread out more power. At that time, I will take a few thousand people to attack the Yuta city. Do you want me to let a few thousand soldiers face tens of thousands of enemies? The war has just begun, and the outcome is still unknown. Please put away your little thoughts. Ji Tianqing didn't give any face to the patriarchs and directly exposed their thoughts. Immediately, the patriarchs' faces were filled with awkwardness as they retreated with embarrassed smiles. Next, Ji Tianqing announced the decision to divide the troops. He would personally lead an army to surround the 9 regions around Yuta city, conquering and clearing them one by one. This army was composed of the Hidden Dragon tribe of the Yinlong domain and the Kuei tribe of the Kuei Mountain domain, totaling 5,000 people. The other army was led by Pine Crane tribe, Quicksand tribe, and Fong tribe. The 7,500 soldiers were led by Pine Crane tribe, Quicksand tribe, and Fong tribe. Although there was a difference in numbers between the 2 armies, the Hidden Dragon tribe and Kuei tribe agreed happily to follow Ji Tianqing. Most importantly, the chiefs of the Hidden Dragon tribe and Kuei tribe were 2 troublemakers. One was straightforward and hot-tempered, while the other was more scheming and scheming. Ji Tianqing had to lead them personally to ensure that there would be no accidents. The Pine Crane clan's loyalty to him was obvious to all. Quicksand tribe and Fong tribe were also more obedient and rarely provoked trouble. It was also easier to let the disciples of these 2 tribes follow the Pine Crane tribe and accept the command of Pine Crane tribe. The meeting ended like this. Ji Tianqing waved his hand to dismiss everyone and ordered them to set out in 8 hours. In the evening, the sun was setting in the west. The 12,500 soldiers of the 5 clans rode on 5 different divine ships and sailed out of ancient Pine Grotto in a grandiose manner. White Dragon steered the god-slaying battleship, carrying Ji Tianqing, and led the battleships of the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan towards the north at lightning speed. Patriarch Song He led the disciples of the Quicksand clan and the Fong clan in a fleet of 3 divine warships and flew toward the southwest. Ji Tianqing's goal and mission was to subdue the 9 regions in the inner circle with Yuta city as the center. The goal of the Pine Crane clan, Quicksand clan and Fong clan was to conquer the 9 territories in the outer circle. In comparison, subduing the 9 regions in the outer circle would take more time and travel. As for the 9 regions in the inner circle, they had to endure even more dangers. They could be ambushed by the Nether River commander at any time. Several hours later, the fleet led by Patriarch Song He arrived at their first target, the domain chief's manor in the Cypress Pine region. For 1,000 years, Patriarch Song he was known as a stubborn old man who refused to yield to the Nether River commander. The domain chief of the Cypress Pine region was the lackey and loyal servant of the Nether River commander. Therefore, the relationship between the Pine Crane clan and the Cypress Pine region commander was very strained. There were often conflicts and disputes. Countless times, the disciples of the Pine Crane clan had dreamed of trampling the domain chief's manor and killing the Cypress Pine region commander. Now, their wish had finally come true. Although they couldn't kill the Cypress Pine region commander for the time being, they could still trample the domain chief's manor. The three divine warships arrived outside the Cypress Pine region commander's manor and arranged themselves in an attack formation in the sky. The domain chief's manor was in a grotto, and the entrance was guarded all year round. However, the domain chief's manor was closed after the Cypress Pine region commander rushed to Yudu with his elite forces. Naturally, the guards guarding the entrance of the domain master's mansion also withdrew into the cave. Seeing that the defense formation of the domain chief's manor was activated and the entrance was closed, there were no guards around. Patriarch Song he decisively ordered the attack. If the enemy hid in the domain chief's manor and didn't show up, he would break the formation by force and attack the domain chief's manor. This scene was very similar to when the Blood Prison Marshal led the army to attack the ancient Pine Grotto. However, the Pine Crane clan had the help of the Kenshin. In the end, the Blood Prison Marshal was defeated and died with regret. However, there were no strong practitioners in the Cypress Pine region commander's manor. There were only more than 3,000 guards and soldiers, and more than 5,000 servants and odd-job workers. The 7,500 disciples of the Pine Crane clan, the Quicksand clan, and the Fong clan formed three battle formations and attacked continuously for 2 days. The three warships also joined the battle and spent billions of resources to bombard the entrance of the grotto. Even though the guards and soldiers who stayed behind to guard the domain chief's manor desperately resisted and defended with all their might. However, after 2 days, the defense formation of the grotto was still breached. Patriarch Song he led more than 7,000 soldiers into the domain chief's manor with murderous intent and started a massacre. The 3,000 guards and soldiers guarding the domain chief's manor resisted with all their might for 4 hours before they were utterly defeated. More than half of them were killed or injured. The survivors surrendered one after another, and thousands of servants and odd-job workers fled in panic. Patriarch Song he followed Ji Tianqing's decree and orders and did not kill the surrendered guards and servants. He took out a jade slip in front of everyone and showed the captives a simple pledge of surrender, forcing them to read it out loud. The pledge was only a little more than 100 words. The general idea was that the captives would no longer fight against the Kenshin and the forces under their command. They would immediately leave the domain chief's manor and stop helping the tyrants. If the captives could abide by the pledge, they would be safe. However, if they dared to do anything that endangered the Kenshin or disobeyed the Kenshin's decree, they would be punished by the heavens and die. The heavenly oath was very simple and clear. It was not harsh. Most importantly, the oath did not require the captives to become Kenshin soldiers and go to the battlefield to kill the enemy. Therefore, more than 1,000 guards and soldiers, and more than 5,000 servants and odd-job workers all recited the heavenly oath. After the pledge was made, Patriarch Song he dismissed the soldiers and servants and ordered them to go their separate ways. They were not to fight against the Kenshin anymore. Those guards, soldiers, and servants had barely survived the ordeal. Naturally, they hurriedly fled from the domain chief's manor and went back to their own homes to look for their mothers. No one risked being struck by the heavenly lightning and rushed to Yudu city to look for their domain chief. They only hoped to be as far away from the disaster as possible so that they would not be implicated. Half a day later, the Pine Cypress domain chief's manor was emptied. All the wealth and resources were confiscated. Patriarch Song he then led the soldiers to seal the entrance of the grotto heaven with array formation skills. After that, he led the fleet to the next area. Chapter 42-43. The army led by Patriarch Pine Crane had a smooth journey, and they advanced triumphantly. Ji Tianqing led the Hidden Dragon tribe and the Kuei tribe to their first target. The domain chief's manor was also closed. 4,000 guards, 5,000 servants, and odd-job workers stayed in the manor, living in fear every day. It only took Ji Tianqing 15 minutes to break through the domain chief's mansion's defensive formation. Then, it took him another 2 hours to break the king-level upper-grade formation, creating a huge gap in it. Even though the guards in the manor noticed something was wrong and came to stop them in time, they couldn't do anything. However, they were unable to stop the 5,000-strong army that was brimming with killing intent. As soon as they came face to face, they were beaten to a pulp and fled in all directions. In the end, the remaining guards, servants, and odd-job workers were surrounded by Ji Tianqing and his army. Ji Tianqing didn't hide anymore. He showed up in the open, frightening the guards and servants. Everyone was terrified and obediently recited a simplified version of the Heavenly Tao Oath. Since the news of Kenshin's arrival on Reincarnation Island had spread, Ji Tianqing had nothing to worry about. The news of the 4 ancient clans gathering their disciples and rushing to ancient Pine Cave from all directions had spread to Yudu. It was proven that the 4 ancient clans hadn't participated in the previous 2 battles, and it was all thanks to the Pine Crane tribe. Since the Pine Crane tribe couldn't have done it, the only answer was Kenshin had taken action. The people on Reincarnation Island believed that Kenshin had come. Commander Mingi and his soldiers also had enough evidence to prove that Kenshin had taken action. Since the truth was out, Ji Tianqing didn't have to hide his whereabouts anymore. What he needed to do was to conquer the 18 districts as soon as possible and then attack Yuda City. Soon, the guards and servants who had recited the Heavenly Tao Oath were chased out of the manor. After the army collected the spoils of war, Ji Tianqing cast a spell and sealed the entrance of the manor. After the first target was taken care of, Ji Tianqing led the army to the next district. In just 2 days, the news spread all over the Reincarnation Island. Everyone knew that the 5 ancient clans were loyal to the Kenshin and formed the rebel alliance. There were more than 12,000 soldiers in total. These soldiers were divided into 2 groups and were conquering various regions. So far, 2 of the domain chief's mansions had been sealed. The guards and servants guarding the domain chief's manor were all driven out and dismissed. After the news spread, millions of people cheered in joy, extremely excited and moved. They were excited not only because the news of Kenshin's arrival on Reincarnation Island was confirmed. More importantly, the Sword God had finally led his troops into battle and began to subdue the various regions. Even though the 18 Zone Lords were hiding in Yuda City and Kenshin was temporarily unable to subdue them, he couldn't order them to restore the freedom of the people. But the people knew that they were not far from freedom and liberation. The 18 Zone Lords were not there, and the defense of the domain chief's manor was also very weak. It was impossible for them to resist the army under Kenshin. The commoners were looking forward to it. In at most 2 months, Sword God would be able to lead his army to attack Yuda City. On the other side, Commander Mingi and many soldiers in Yuda City also received the news. Commander Mingi was, of course, full of anger, anxiety, and worry. The morale of the tens of thousands of soldiers was even lower, and they were quite flustered. Countless people were discussing this matter, and they were somewhat at a loss. This time, no matter how strict Commander Mingi's orders were, the soldiers were not allowed to talk or run away, but it was useless. Not only were the ordinary soldiers on tenterhooks, but many of the generals were also burning with anxiety. The entire Yudu city was filled with a heavy, oppressive, and desperate atmosphere. It seemed that the morale would collapse and chaos would occur even before the arrival of the Kenshin army. Time passed day after day. One district after another was conquered by the 2 armies of the Rebel Alliance. The Rebel Alliance also cleared the guards and servants of the various domain chiefs' manors, and then sealed the entrances and exits. As for the guards and servants of the domain chief's manor who were dismissed, they were forced to swear an oath to the heavenly Tao that they would not fight against the rebel alliance again, let alone endanger the interests of the Kenshin. Although there were very few guards and servants who were very loyal to their masters. After being chased out of the domain chief's manor, they rushed to Yudu to seek refuge with their masters or inform them. However, without exception, these people were all reduced to ashes by the divine lightning that descended from the sky. Not even dregs were left. More than 20 examples in a row repeatedly proved the existence of the oath to the heavenly Tao, and the results were very terrifying. As a result, those guards and servants who had been dismissed no longer dared to violate their oaths. Of course, many people discovered that they would not violate the heavenly punishment if they revealed the news of the domain chief's manor being attacked and sealed, and spread the name and power of the Kenshin among the people. Therefore, the news of the various domain chiefs' manors falling one after another continued to spread. The name of the Kenshin, its powerful strength, and methods were also spread more and more loudly. A month had passed. The army led by Ji Tianqing successively conquered 7 regions. Although the army led by him had been circling around Yudu, they had not encountered any powerful interceptions or ambushes. Commander Mingi and his tens of thousands of soldiers were determined to defend Yudu to the death and did not take the initiative to attack at all. The army led by Patriarch Song He successively conquered 6 regions. More than half of Reincarnation Island was controlled by the rebel alliance. The domain chiefs' manors of the 13 regions were cleared. Many emperors of the empires were trembling in fear, afraid that they would be wiped out by the rebel alliance's army. Fortunately, the 2 armies of the rebel alliance only cleared and sealed the various domain chiefs' manors and did not harm the innocent. The emperors and people of the empires were only in awe of the Kenshin. They did not fear or hate them. They also had the mentality of a bystander, looking forward to what would happen next. 40 days later, the army led by Ji Tianqing conquered and sealed the domain chiefs' manors of 2 more regions, being the first to complete the mission. 50 days later, the army led by Patriarch Song He also completed the mission. So far, the 18 regions of Reincarnation Island had all been conquered by the Rebel Alliance. Everyone knew that the Rebel Alliance's army was about to encircle and attack Yuda City. The final battle was coming, and the outcome would soon be decided. Would Kenshin flatten Yudu and take control of the entire Reincarnation Island? Or would Mingi lead a desperate counterattack, turn defeat into victory, and regain the hegemony of the Reincarnation Island? Of course, countless people and forces did not know that the incarnation of the god of the underworld had long been destroyed by Ji Tianqing in the void. Many people were still worried about Kenshin, afraid that the incarnation of the god of the underworld would come back to support Commander Mingi. At that time, if Kenshin could not defeat the incarnation of the god of the underworld, all his efforts would be in vain. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 42-44. Ji Tianqing led the Hidden Dragon tribe and the Kuei tribe to the south gate of Yuda City after sealing the 9 regions in the inner circle. However, the 3 divine warships stopped 200,000 miles away from the southern city gate, resting and waiting quietly. Yuda City wasn't big, but it was surrounded by the river of black water. It was also surrounded by poisonous fog. Over the past half a year, Commander Mingi and the Blood Hell Marshal had thought of all sorts of ways to strengthen the defenses of Yuda City. On top of the Black River and poisonous fog, Commander Mingi had also mobilized tens of thousands of soldiers to set up 6 layers of formations and thousands of traps outside the city. The city walls of Yuda City, which were 1,000 feet tall, had also closed all the entrances and exits. They were heavily guarded, and there was a sentry every 5 and 10 steps. The city protecting formation and the 6 layers of heaven and earth formation outside the city were constantly in operation, and huge amounts of cultivation resources were expended every day. However, Commander Mingi had been in charge of Reincarnation Island for close to 1,000 years, and he had plundered countless cultivation resources. No matter how much energy was expended to maintain the defenses of Yuta City, the cultivation resources stored in the treasury were enough to last for more than 100 years. When the news of the domain lord manor of the 18 regions being attacked and sealed by the rebel alliance reached Yuta City, Commander Mingi knew that the time to decide his fate had arrived. He gathered the 18 domain lords, generals, and god kings for a meeting in the middle of the night. He told everyone to be on their guard and be prepared for battle. Even though the domain lords, generals, and god kings were terrified, and the morale of the tens of thousands of soldiers was low. However, they knew that the Kenshin and the rebel alliance wouldn't let them off just because of their passive attitude. When the Kenshin led the rebel alliance to attack Yuta City, they would be the first to be killed. Therefore, the domain lords, generals, and god kings pulled themselves together and showed their most resolute determination to command the soldiers to resist to the end. 2 hours later, Commander Mingi's decree was passed to the army, and tens of thousands of soldiers knew about it. No matter how lazy and passive the 50,000 soldiers were, they had to pull themselves together and be on full alert in order to protect their lives. The tens of thousands of soldiers were tense, and they unleashed the defenses of Yuta City to the extreme. However, after waiting for 2 whole days, there was still no sign of the Kenshin and Rebel Alliance's army. They immediately felt a strong sense of defeat. For 2 consecutive days, their nerves were stretched taut and they were highly focused. This caused the soldiers to feel mentally exhausted. As for the Kenshin and the Rebel Alliance's army, there was still no news. They did not know how long they would have to wait. The soldiers could not hold on any longer and complained to their generals. The generals couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't make a decision on their own. They could only report to General Mingi. Actually, Commander Mingi was also very puzzled. He had clearly received reports from various scouts that confirmed that the Kenshin was leading the Rebel Alliance army toward Yuta City. According to the estimation of time and distance, the army under Kenshin should have long reached Yuta City. Why did Kenshin and his army not show up even after 2 whole days? Of course, Commander Mingi had thought about it before. The Kenshin only brought 5,000 soldiers, so they definitely didn't have the confidence to take down Yuta City. Therefore, the Kenshin was most likely waiting for the army led by Patriarch Song He. After the 2 armies converged, the Kenshin would then launch their attack. However, the problem was that the Kenshin and their 5,000 soldiers were just outside Yuta City. No one knew where they were hiding. As long as this problem was not solved, Commander Mingi would not be at ease. He even suspected that Sword God might have used some scheme to bring the army of 5,000 to infiltrate Yuta City. Furthermore, would the Kenshin sneak into the Netherworld God Palace and launch an attack at the crucial moment to assassinate him? The Blood Hell Marshal had already been killed, and he could not do anything alone. If the Kenshin assassinated him, Yuta City would be leaderless and would collapse immediately. When he thought of this problem, Commander Mingi felt a chill run down his spine. He was very worried and anxious. Now, the various generals came to report the situation again. They said that the soldiers were unable to maintain their vigilance for long periods of time. Helplessly, Commander Mingi could only comfort the generals and allow the 50,000 soldiers to temporarily relax their vigilance and return to their normal alert state. However, Commander Mingi emphasized again and again that the soldiers could not let down their guard and had to remain vigilant at all times. In addition, he ordered the generals to send out more scouts and spies to search for the whereabouts of the Kenshin and the Rebel Alliance army. No matter what, they had to confirm the Kenshin's whereabouts before they could deduce the Kenshin's attack route and plan. This battle was not only a battle of tens of thousands of soldiers, but it was also a battle of wits and courage between Commander Mingi and the Kenshin. In reality, Commander Mingi's guesses and suspicions were very reasonable. Ji Tianqing brought the 5,000 soldiers of the Hidden Dragon tribe and the Kuei tribe to hide in a mountain range 200,000 miles away from Yuta City. He was indeed waiting for the other army to converge. Of course, While he was waiting for Patriarch Song He's army, he could not reveal his tracks. Otherwise, if Commander Mingi knew of his tracks, he would definitely strengthen the defenses in certain areas. He was not afraid, but the soldiers under him would definitely be affected. In addition, Ji Tianqing's plan also included assassinating Commander Mingi. He had considered many times sneaking into Yuda's city and trying to enter the Netherworld Divine Palace to kill Commander Mingi. Once Yuda's city lost its leader, it would fall into chaos and their morale would collapse. At that time, he could cooperate with the army under him and easily take down Yuda's city. This was also the most labor-saving method to reduce the number of casualties. Of course, he also guessed that Commander Mingi was very cautious and shrewd. He would definitely guard against this move of his. Therefore, he did not treat this assassination plan as his first choice. Time passed day after day. The people of Reincarnation Island and the various factions were all paying attention to Yuda's city's movements. Countless people were looking forward to Kenshin leading the army to take down Yuda's city as soon as possible. However, countless people and factions waited for a few days and did not hear any relevant news. Yuda's city was still as calm as ever. Under the heavy and oppressive atmosphere, people maintained their vigilance. However, Kenshin and his army seemed to have evaporated into thin air. There was no more news. This made many factions and people start to discuss and speculate what was going on. Of course, no one felt that Kenshin was afraid of Commander Mingi and his army, so he did not dare to show himself. Everyone felt that Kenshin's sudden disappearance was definitely a conspiracy. It was estimated that there would be shocking news coming out soon. This speculation won the approval of countless people and also aroused everyone's expectations. Almost the entire Reincarnation Island focused their attention on Yuda's city, waiting for the final battle and the result. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.